Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chris Taub. I'm the Chief Deputy at the AG's office, and Christina Moylan, who's the Chief of our Consumer Protection Division, is sitting on my left. I'd like to welcome everyone to the second meeting of this work group, and I'm really happy with the showing that we have. We have a lot of folks here today. I think what I'd like to do, and I think we'll probably do this for every meeting, even though all of us are getting to know each other, there's members of the public that are participating and watching on Zoom or either here. So I think I'd just like to have everyone introduce themselves again. So why don't I start on my left, and we'll just go around the horseshoe.
My name is Jeff Groves. I'm the retired general counsel from O'Reilly Auto Parts and was a general counsel there from 2006 to 2023 and retired then and moved to Yarmouth, Maine, and I'm now living happily ever after.
I'm Tommy Hickey. I'm the director of the Maine Automotive Right to Repair Coalition.
I'm Brian Boggs. I'm a senior director at Tesla of service engineering, making repair and maintenance information available to manufacturer affiliates and independent repair shops.
My name is Elizabeth Frazier. I'm a partner at Pierce Atwood in Portland, Maine, and I represent the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, which are the car manufacturers.
Jack Quirk from Quirk Auto Group, representing the Maine Auto Dealers of Maine.
Good afternoon, Eric Luftig, Senior Vice President for Dorman Products. I oversee engineering, manufacturing, quality, and our overall product organization. I can give an overview of Dorman at a later time, but we've got vested interest in supporting what's going on here in Maine.
Hi, I'm Megan Sway. I'm the Policy Director at the American Civil Liberties Union of Maine.
And then we have two members that are participating by Zoom pursuant to our remote participation policy. Lynn, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Lynn Gardner. I'm the Director of Legal Affairs for the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, and I'm here as a representative for the Secretary of State.
And Katrina?
Hi, I'm Katrina Fitzgerald. I'm Deputy Director at the Electronic Privacy Information Center, or EPIC. We're a nonprofit advocacy organization focused on protecting the right to privacy.
Thanks. So we have sort of two major substantive topics that are on the agenda for today. One of them is presentation and discussions of the intended functions and duties of the independent entity, and the other is presentations and discussions of information regarding onboard diagnostic and repair information and access to such information. Before we dive into that, I just want to check with the members and see if there's anything that people want to talk about preliminarily, any comments or input or questions that folks have before we sort of dive into the meat for today. Okay, seeing nothing. So I think if I could, I guess what I'd like to do, Tommy, is to call on you to sort of start the presentation off, since the Right to Repair Coalition was sort of the motivating force behind this. I think then, people might have some questions, and then other people might want to speak, but I think it just makes sense, if you're willing, to kind of start off the discussion of sort of what you envisioned or what the coalition envisioned as sort of the purpose and function of the independent entity.
Sure. So do you want to do the presentation how I see it, or would you like to, because there's two kind of things here. There's the intent of the independent entity, and then there's telematics 101. I believe are the two kind of subject topics here. Do you want to do one at a time, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. Why don't we break them up one at a time? So why don't we just deal right now with sort of the purpose and functions of the independent entity, and then we can have that discussion and questions, and then sort of once people feel that they're comfortable with that topic, then we can move to sort of the telematics diagnostic part of the event agenda.
It's funny. I don't even know which way to tilt my head, since everyone I'm kind of talking to is over here. But I think in order to understand the independent entity, I think the historical background of kind of how and why we got this ballot question put on it in Maine in the beginning. So I've been a part of Right to Repair since 2008. My first job was the grassroots coordinator, and I actually went out to 1,600 independent repair shops in 2.5 years in Massachusetts to just hear from independent repairers some of the issues that they were facing in the repair space. And a lot of the issues that they were facing are issues that the 2012 ballot question subsequent MOU handled. But what was happening is that they were getting death by 1,000 cuts. So manufacturers had 26 different ways of fixing motor vehicles, and they were keeping independent repairers in the dark with either missing information, missing codes, parts, whatever the issue may be. So I heard firsthand. I was lucky enough to travel to trade shows in Las Vegas multiple times. I've talked to cybersecurity experts, auto engineers. I've gone to Sacramento to talk with tool manufacturers, and I've really seen kind of the ecosystem throughout this 14 years of being a part of this question. So in 2008, 2009, I heard from independent repairers on their issues. In 2012, the Right to Repair Coalition in Massachusetts passed a ballot question. It passed it at 84% in Massachusetts in 2012, and it was all about a level playing field. So it said to car manufacturers, whatever you give to dealers, you have to give to independent repair shops. And in 2012, the way you would diagnose a car is you would plug in a scan tool into an OBD port. The OBD port would diagnose the vehicle, and then you would order a part, you would order a repair, and the information that manufacturers gave to dealers that had to give to independent repair shops. After the 2012 Massachusetts question passed, there was a 2013 MOU, which in 49 other states would mirror the Massachusetts law of a level playing field for dealers and independent repair shops. In that MOU, telematics was exempt. Now, in 2013, telematics was not really a big technology that was used in a lot of vehicles, and it was very much in its infancy. Fast forward years of trying to get, telematics back on the map to have that level playing field. We passed in Massachusetts 2020 an update to the Massachusetts the Massachusetts Right to Repair law. What was happening is that telematics, as of 2022, is in 90% of vehicles. And that is a technology that was cut out of the 2013 MOU. So really the entire purpose of passing this question was to update the Right to Repair law that covered the OBD port. And one of the telematics 101s I want to talk about here is that telematics is a technology where the OBD port is now becoming wireless. Just like your headphones are becoming wireless, just like your landlines are now cell phones, your emails that used to be mail. That is really the reason why we're here today, is that technology has bypassed independent repairers and car owners. The whole paradigm of having car manufacturers give information to independent repairers and dealers has not worked. And I think one of the reasons we gave car owners their information, because we believe, our coalition believes, that when you buy the car, you deserve to have the information necessary to fix it and share that information with who you have. So telematics is really just the OBD port information that's generated through those scan tools that's now being generated wirelessly. So there's hundreds, if not thousands, of modules. And again, we have a technical presentation that will be coming in to show you exactly, the telematics, what you need to be able to fix a car, the standards, et cetera, the technical aspects in order to implement this law. And I do have a short video, which I'll get to in a minute, that can show you kind of where we're going in terms of the future of auto repairs. So telematics is really just the OBD port that has become wireless, and the idea of this law was to give car owners that information and the information necessary to fix it to share with an independent repairer or a dealer. The independent entity was simply supposed to be an entity, an ad hoc committee, an unpaid ad hoc committee that would look into issues that manufacturers were using to work around, if they were, to work around the Right to Repair law. So this ad hoc committee would be groups of technical experts that would be looking at regulating the standardized platform, not creating the standardized platform. That would be the manufacturers that would be creating that. But it would be an ongoing basis of making sure the manufacturers and independent repairers and all the stakeholders that are involved in the repair ecosystem, that a level playing field was truly happening. And that was the intent of the independent entity, not to store any information, but an ad hoc committee brought in to police any issues and honestly to educate the Attorney General's office, because we do see the Attorney General's office playing a big role in making sure that consumers aren't hurt by this.
All right, thanks. Let me ask the members if they have any questions, either questions for Tommy or their own comments, or anything that they want to sort of throw in at this point. And again, this is really focused on sort of the purpose and function of the independent entity.
Question, do we have a definition of what telematics is?
Yeah, in the ballot question, we define.
Is there something written in writing with the manufacturers, or, what's?
in the ballot question, we define what we want the telematics is all encompassing information, right? So we define what telematic information that this ballot question will be referring to.
But should we as a group have a definition of what it is?
We define what information that this ballot question is referring to inside the ballot statute. So it would be mechanical information necessary to diagnose, maintain, and repair the car.
Okay,
And
now,
that's
I'm
set
just-
in the statute.
All right.
Other questions? I've got a few. So one of the things that you identified was that this would be an unpaid ad hoc committee. And I'm just wondering, like, was there thought given to whether there were people who would be willing to serve on the committee in an unpaid capacity? Because this does sound like it would be a fair amount of work potentially. And I'm just wondering sort of like what the thought was about the extent to which you would find qualified people to serve on this without pay.
Yeah, I think we definitely have technical folks, like I said, that are going to present to you that are willing to sit on an ad hoc committee to make sure that this law is implemented correctly. Having said that, that was our vision of it. This ad hoc committee we're going into a kind of a brave new world here, and we're proud that the Mainers spoke so highly of our question and their vote. But we do have technical folks that will sit on this. But the idea of it was for it to be an ad hoc committee entity.
And then one of the things you said is that that one of the things that this independent entity would be doing would be to looking into, whether to the extent to which maybe car manufacturers are trying to avoid complying with their obligations. And is that right? Is
Yeah.
that kind of one of the things that they'd be
Right.
doing?
So the idea was they wouldn't be storing information, but if 2024 Nissan owners are having an issue getting their information, sharing it with an independent repair is maybe having issues fixing the car, not being able to reflash certain fixes of the car, that would be brought to the attention of this working group or to the Attorney General, then to the working group. And then it would be how many complaints do we have here? Do we need to look into the standardized platform in which Nissan has created to make sure that this law is doing what it's supposed to do, which is to allow car owners to get their car fully repaired at independent repair shops?
Okay. And sort of what you're describing, I mean, sounds a lot like the work that state enforcement agencies do. I mean, there's a lot of agencies in state government and, they get complaints from people. They look into whether the complaints have merit. If they do, they might, either contact the entity and try to bring them into compliance or, maybe take stronger efforts if necessary. And so I guess I'm wondering whether there was some thought that for some reason it made more sense to structure this as this sort of independent entity with an unpaid ad hoc committee versus some kind of like regulatory authority within state government.
I think we made it because of the technical expertise that this really needs. I think a lot of, like I said, this is a brave new world. This is the second state to pass this. This technology is new and it becomes more and more relevant in vehicles. And in order to have the technical expertise, it made folks to have stakeholders from both sides be a part of the process of implementing this law.
And then besides, so I definitely understand the idea that this entity would be sort of monitoring compliance, fielding complaints, looking into whether there are entities that aren't really complying with either the letter or the spirit of the law. But it sounds like there's some other functions that the entity might do. Like, do you envision that the entity would be like providing like a standardized kind of set of protocols for how information is supposed to be provided to independent repair shops and owners? I guess I'm just trying to wonder, like, beyond sort of monitoring and enforcement, like what else this entity would be doing.
I think our technical folks will get into exactly what this law is going to look like when it's implemented, but the standardization came. So one of the fights in 2011, 2012 was that we, as the aftermarket in the independent repair community, wanted to standardize the OBD port, which means there's 26 different ways to fix a car right now. Let's make one tool operate amongst 26 different car manufacturers. The fight was that manufacturers said it wasn't possible. When telematics started to become more relevant in vehicles, the MOU was signed to standardize the OBD port because manufacturers saw a way to get to this new technology to bypass the law. So we know that the OBD port could be standardized, and we know that telematics can be standardized. So I don't see this entity being so much as the ones that are going to standardize the telematic information, the mechanical information, but I do see this as to make sure that the proper standards, the proper tokens, proper authentication, the proper information is being used so that folks can make full repairs in their cars.
Okay. So I'm just pulling up the citizen initiated bill, which was LD 1677, an act regarding automotive right to repair. And so one of the things that the independent entity is charged with doing is managing cybersecure access to motor vehicle generated data. I'm just wondering if you could flesh that out a little bit, what it means to sort of manage cybersecure access.
Again, I think our technical folks are going to show the presentation in which these cybersecurity protocols that have been co-signed, co-authored by the car manufacturers in order to implement this law. And I think you'll be able to hear from them exactly what kind of these protocols that can be used to implement this. And then it's kind of the chicken before the egg type of situation with that.
Okay. Let me just stop. I might have a couple more questions, but I've asked a lot. Let me just see now if any other members have questions that they want to ask. Tommy? Do you have any
I
questions?
have one follow-up.
Yeah.
So I just have one follow-up to the last thing you said about the protocols. Were you talking about certain guidelines or protocols that are already built into the MOU?
No, so the MOU after 5 years is no longer has no merit, and obviously our question passing is the law that we'd be trying to implement.
Thanks.
And at this point, does it make sense for me to show kind of the video of what I was just articulating in terms of the future of car repairs?
I think that might be better fit into our next discussion, which
Okay.
is going to be about telematics and vehicle data. I mean, I guess other than, and maybe this is a question that we need to, that we need to hear from sort of technical experts about, but other than sort of doing the monitoring and enforcement work, like what is the need for the independent entity? I guess, I mean, in a lot of like regulatory regimes, there'll be a statute, there'll be some rules implementing the statute. It'll impose a bunch of requirements on the regulated entities. And then that enforcement agency, will monitor compliance and bring enforcement actions. And so I'm wondering like what the independent entity would need to do beyond that. Like why isn't it, I guess, enough just to have to set the standards that manufacturers have to comply with in providing access to data, and then this entity can do the monitoring and enforcement. But I guess I'm still not clear like what other stuff the entity is going to be doing. I don't know if that was a very articulate question.
No,
but-
you're asking what is the purpose? If we took out the independent entity, couldn't you just go with this law, have the penalty clause in there and go from there?
Yeah.
I think that's fair. I think the entity, and it's become more of an issue than I think we saw it to be. We really saw it as an arena to have a referee, right? Where you're actually having manufacturers be able to plead their case, have the experts that understand the technical aspects of this get together and come up with a consensus on Attorney General. This is where we think we land on Nissan or Ford or whatever the manufacturer to be called out for. But in terms of their role, that was really it. It was where to have an arena or a referee to determine, the standards and the tokens, et cetera, of making sure. Because like I said, I don't think the Attorney General, and I don't want to speak too far, but having the expertise of figuring out the auto engineer world. And I think this would be more of a tool that the Attorney General's office could use in making sure that this law was enforced, and really about transparency and accountability.
You described,
Yeah, I mean, in my way of thinking, to maybe hop onto Tommy's answer a little bit here, is that, this is a dynamic process. And we've seen that play out over history over the past 10, 12 years, from, 2012 and 2013 with the MOU to the OBD2 port and getting information that way, to now the omission of that on new vehicles altogether and communication exclusively to the OEMs through telematics. And so, the independent entity, I think, in my opinion, is built in to deal with some of that dynamic process. We don't know what technology is going to happen in the future, but I think it would probably be naive of us to think that things would not continue to evolve. And so that's in my opinion, part and parcel of what this group might also deal with.
You described how the independent entity would be to have this arena and a referee to listen to complaints and determine standards and tokens. But those two halves of the sentence seem like pretty separate, like the determining are independent repairers having difficulty in gaining access to repair and maintenance information and capabilities and telematics. That's one thing that makes sense. Having the independent entity identify standards and specific certifications and to have certified independent repairers, or to have certificates and tokens and different digital certificates for how people authenticate. That's much more like prescriptive and technical, and two very different roles. I worry that if this is interpreted in the very prescriptive route, that it will quickly become outdated. You just mentioned how dynamic the technology is. There's portions in this law that talk about needing to use a mobile application to do certain things. A decade ago, I didn't even have an iPhone, so we're talking about like mandating a certain technology that didn't really exist 10-ish years ago, and that runs the risk of stifling innovation or not being compatible with like the future direction of different technologies. So it makes sense to me that this monitoring and enforcement aspect exist. It makes a little bit less sense to me whether there's a specific need for the independent entity to determine standards for telematics. You were describing earlier how part of the outcome of the 2012 ballot measure and 2013 MOU was to create a level playing field for access to onboard diagnostics via the OBD port and other repair and maintenance information. That came about, and without a similar independent entity identifying very prescriptive standards in one state, the state of Maine, but not other states. So why is it that telematics specifically needs the creation of the state agency only in the state of Maine to create very prescriptive standards for telematics, where like a similar analogy doesn't exist for the other aspects of automotive repair?
So I think there was a lot there. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said we didn't have a phone 10 years ago. So this mobile-based app could be gone in 10 years. I think that would be one of the reasons for the entity to be around, is that if this technology is going to evolve, which we know that motor vehicle technology is going to continue to evolve as cars get more new, more computers, more technology in general. I think the entire point of the entity is to make sure that as this technology evolves, that the experts are taking a look at this and a uniform aspect of this, and in the state of Maine, which is the state that passed the bill, to make sure that we have the proper technical folks looking at this as technology evolves.
And I would probably hop on the back end of that and say also, so that this has been a real process. Obviously here in Maine, it's been a process in Massachusetts and other places where these issues come up. But 85% of the voters in Maine want the right to repair. I mean, they said that in the last election. So how do they continue to have that once they have it? How does it continue to be continuous over time, because things are dynamic and things change? How can this process be reactive? And part of that is to have people who are vested, from the auto manufacturers to the dealers, to the shops, to the aftermarket parts and distribution folks, to talking about the issues that come up in real time, so that they can solve those issues, so that the consumers can continue to have a choice in where they have their motor vehicles repaired. Otherwise, the possibility is they lose that choice.
Thank you. This is Elizabeth Fraser. I was just going to raise the point, and I think it gets to what Ryan was asking about, sort of setting up this independent entity for telematics data as opposed to other types of data. I would actually take that one step further and say that we're setting up effectively a consumer protection type scheme, which is completely distinct and separate from anything else that. And I would argue that car repair, while certainly complex, is no more complex than any other consumer area for which there's a regulatory board or a licensing board or some type of state-based agency. And so I'm not sure what the need in the specific instances for why experts wouldn't be used in the same way that they currently are in other regulatory decision making. The only other thing I wanted to raise was that it says in the citizen initiative that the independent entity shall establish and administer access to vehicle generated data that is available through the OBD or that is transmitted through the standardized platform. So two questions on that, I guess. You said manufacturers would come up with the standardized platform. I think I would raise, and I have to go back and ask some folks, but I would raise some antitrust concerns with all of the car companies sitting down together and coming up with one standardized platform, because I don't think that would be permissive. And if that's not what standardized means, what does it mean? Then that might have been my only question for now. Yeah, I think that's it for now.
Well, to the point of standardization, the OBD port was not possible to standardize until a Massachusetts ballot question was passed. And then there was an OBD standardized port. So we believe that not only does it not have any federal laws that it would be in conflict with, we think it can be done. And like I said, we do have technical folks that can prove that it can be done. I think in terms of having the entity, I think we all agree. I mean, especially in the state of Maine, where folks are driving an hour and a half to 2 hours, having an ad hoc committee, entity, task force, making sure that a law that 84% of people voted in favor of is upheld to protect consumers is of the utmost importance, as car repairs are probably frequent and will continue to be frequent, and making sure this law is upheld to the best of its ability, I think is really important.
If I may, in terms of your antitrust question, I'm certainly not an antitrust lawyer by any stretch. So take this for what it is intended. That the common platform really isn't intended to be anti-competitive. It's intended to engender competition. Competition between manufacturers and their dealers and repairers, and also giving consumers choice for taking their vehicle to an independent shop of their own choosing. And so, I don't think it really favors one manufacturer over another in coming together and discussing what standardized platform is appropriate to have a more competitive environment. That'd be my perspective.
So I am an antitrust lawyer. And I think in terms of having industry participants get together to participate in the formation of a standardized platform, obviously the Citizens Initiative contemplates that there's a government entity that oversees that. And I think so long as that is in place, so that might be one important reason to have some kind of set of rules and regs that the government is involved in developing and implementing, whether it's an independent entity, whether it's a state agency. And so long as there is that kind of government overlay and government decision-making involved, I think the fact that industry participants are getting together to help the government figure that out would take this out of any kind of antitrust liability concerns.
But isn't this government entity made up of ad hoc committee members that are of the industry in that it is tasked with generating
Yeah,
the standardized platform?
right. So I mean,
Is this like circular, incestuous?
well, you'd have to be careful how it was done. There would have to be, I think, in the legislation that that the working group is supposed to be developing to give the independent entity guidance about how to develop these things. There would have to be some thought given to some of the guardrails that would prevent the industry from doing industry things that are anti-competitive, and to make sure that there is government involvement in deliberately intending to displace competition, in overseeing the conduct that is allowed. I mean, I think that is something to think about, but I don't think it's insurmountable, and I don't think it's really, I mean, we're talking about development of rules and regs in an open process that the government and the legislature and the people of the state of Maine are endorsing. We're not saying industry participants go forth and do your own thing. I mean, this is all going to be the government endorsing it and monitoring it. Yeah.
Follow-up question to that. I would ask you, do you think, or do you envision that the government is essentially the platform to the standardized, holder of the standardized access here? Because, I mean, to put this down to like nuts and bolts, what are we talking about here? I mean, I still haven't heard an actual description of what the standardized platform is. Is it a piece of software? Is it the use of Bluetooth? Is it the use of wireless? If it's a piece of software that doesn't exist, someone's going to have to pay for it, and someone's going to have to code it, and someone's going to have to write it. To me, if the state's doing that, I would tend to agree with your point. I am less comfortable with that analysis when it's private industry being asked to do that.
Well, I think we still haven't gotten our heads around what the it is, right? So.
And part of the wording seems difficult to interpret. It says that it's the independent entity exists to establish and administer access. Like the word establishing and administering this access makes it seem like it has a very active role in the creation of the platform and the administration of the platform. Like when a request comes in to access a vehicle, it's this entity that is administering, yes, you get access, no, you don't get access. If that's not the interpretation, then I don't know what establish and administer means.
I also want to make one more point about the entity. I mean, the entity is not comprised of all industry participants, all manufacturer participants, or all repair participants. I mean, the independent entity is by design supposed to be a balanced body. So I think that's less like some of the problems that licensing boards get into, where you've got, you know, primarily members of the regulated profession setting the rules and making some anti-competitive decisions. And even there, I mean, it's really fact dependent whether or not they're going to get into any kind of antitrust liability. But this just feels like a very different type of entity to me.
I also think in terms of like what is the it here, this is no doubt in terms of an engineering standpoint, a complex issue in itself, but it's really a simple issue. I mean, 84% of Mainers voted to have their information directly given to them. And I think we have technical experts that we look forward to presenting here that have pre-existing standards, pre-existing technologies that have actually been co-signed by car manufacturers that will show that this law can be implemented today if the manufacturers play ball. I think this is the manufacturers having a closed system. When we talk about what the it is, I mean, this is a technology that manufacturers use. It's brought up into a cloud. It's then disseminated to whoever they wanted to, but it's not the independent repair and it's not the car owner. And that's really what the it is all about, is you have this technology and it's not going to the car owner or the independent repair to make sure that people can fix their cars where they want. And we look forward to the technical folks to showing how this can be done.
If I could jump in, Chris, too, there. Yeah, I know in the last meeting, I watched the YouTube video. I wasn't here, and I've heard it mentioned today too. There's talk about this language in paragraph 2 of establish and administer access to vehicle-generated data. But I think, you know, when I read this language, my eyes are drawn immediately to the language that is below, where it says the independent entity shall, and then it enumerates A, B, and C. And those are really the things that in my opinion, I think we ought to be focused on rather than the language above in the paragraph, which is more general. But I mean, this specifically says this independent entity shall, and this is what, the law authorizes the independent entity to do.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to sort of ask a similar, I guess, question or something that's related to that, which is there is this language about the standardized access platform. But then when you sort of look at the rest of the statute, and in particular, sort of like I'm looking at paragraph 6, which is sort of, I think that's sort of the telematics piece of this. But even, like sections 4 and 5, which I sort of think about as sort of like the old fashioned way of accessing vehicle generated data. I don't see anything in there that suggests that manufacturers have to have something that's standard across all manufacturers versus something that has to be standardized like within their makes and models. So like I'm looking at a part that says, it has to equip all vehicles sold in the state with an interoperable, standardized, and owner-authorized access platform across all the manufacturers' makes and models. And so let me just go on there and then ask a question about it. It also says that the platform must be directly accessible by the motor vehicle owner through a mobile-based application. So I guess what I'm wondering is like, if I'm Ford, do I have to use sort of like the same mobile application and the same way of accessing the data as, GM does or Toyota does or Honda does? Is it sort of like each manufacturer decides how it's going to provide access, or is it that the independent entity is going to say, all of you manufacturers, like this is the one way you have to do it. You have to have a single mobile application that's going to work with everyone. Does that make sense? Like
Sure. Here's what I can tell you what the intent was. In 2010, 2011, 2012, when the OBD port was not standardized, you had 26 different ways to fix cars. You had 26 different proprietary tools in order to fix them. Joe's repair shop could not afford to buy all of the tools necessary to make a repair on a Ford and a GM. He had to pick one. He had to specialize in those cars. Consumers get hurt, businesses get hurt. The idea of this ballot question is to say, manufacturers, you have to create an open standardized platform. Right now, you have a proprietary closed system in your vehicle that only goes to the Ford network if you're a Ford owner. So there's going to be a platform put on the car, which is going to allow a platform on there. It's going to be standardized, going to allow information to go to a car owner that owns the car. And then when it's shared with an independent repair, they can fix a Ford, a GM, and a Nissan. So the technical folks can show you exactly how that's going to be standardized. But again, the OBD port was not standardized and then became standardized through a state law in Massachusetts for the MOU. So
don't
it is
know
the
if
same
that's
concept of that.
Quite accurate. The OBD port was standardized in like 1996. The activities in Massachusetts did not change the types of standards within that port for its form factor, the type of communication protocols contained within it, the type of information available, and what electronic signals would be sent or not sent. What that legislation did and what the MOU did was to say, was to create this level playing field that we're talking about, that whatever information or capabilities a manufacturer made available to its authorized dealers, the same information, same capabilities in the same manner, same form, same extent needed to be made available to an independent repair. So I think it's not accurate to state that the OBD port became standardized as a result of these activities in 2012, 2013, 2014, because it was already standardized in 1996.
Okay, but standardizing a port without the proper information in it doesn't seem to be helpful to the independent repair or the car owner, as if the dealers are getting different information.
I guess gets back to my earlier point about like being very prescriptive in the legislation versus trying to stick more towards the intention of creating a level playing field where like whatever capability is available to a manufacturer's authorized dealer, same capability available to an independent repair, and like how that gets done, it's up for innovation and that the enforcement can still exist to make sure that, okay, there's parity, but not to accidentally create a very prescriptive way of doing things.
Okay, so the intent, just to be, because this was the presentation, the intent is for a level playing field in this aspect.
And so if I understand, the intent is that there be sort of a standardized method of accessing the data that would be across all manufacturers that are selling vehicles in the state. So there'd be like sort of one mobile application that if you have that application, it would allow you to access data regardless of whether it's a Honda, a Toyota, a Ford, whatever.
Yeah, the intent would be that independent repairers wouldn't have to specialize in the repair of their vehicles. It would be that an independent repairer could access all the information necessary to fix a Ford, a Nissan, a GM. And again, our technical folks will get into kind of the aspects of how this is made possible.
I wouldn't necessarily think of it as a specific mobile app that you download on your phone, as long as whatever application you are using adheres to the agreed upon standards. Much like if I'm logging into my laptop and I use like Microsoft has OAuth or some other authentication system, a variety of software applications can utilize that same technology in order to authenticate and identify individuals without it being a very specific application.
Right, but I'm assuming that the intent is not that, for example, a repair shop has to buy 12 different mobile apps in order to access 12 different
Yeah, I agree that should be
manufacturers.
the intention is to make it easy for anyone to do automotive repairs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would disagree with the interpretation though, that about whether it's standardized across all manufacturers or just across the manufacturers' makes and models, because in section 6 for the required equipment, the access platform, and so I actually view the platform as being, what is it? It's an access platform. Yes, it is a standardized access platform. It's an owner authorized access platform, but the thing that it does is it is an access platform. That is its role. And that it is described as being standardized across all the manufacturers' makes and models, not across all the makes and models sold across all manufacturers in the state of Maine.
And I think this might be my last question. That's always dangerous to say that. But Tommy, in Massachusetts, my understanding is that there is not a provision creating an independent entity in Massachusetts. And I'm wondering if sort of in the course of your work and talking with folks, if you've identified problems that have resulted in Massachusetts, at least problems in your view, that are the result of there not being an independent entity there.
So in Massachusetts, you're correct in that the independent entity wouldn't be regulating telematic data, but the purpose of the independent entity was that after 2012 in the OBD port situation where manufacturers had to give dealers and independent repair shops the same information, firewalls were being put around OBD ports, which I always put in layman's terms. You have to give your little brother your phone, but you don't have to tell him the passcode. And that was really the issues that the independent repairs were facing after 2012, 2013, after the MOU. So that independent entity was supposed to be put on there saying, manufacturer, you can put a firewall over your OBD port, but you have to administer it with an entity unaffiliated. So it's the exact same issue that we're facing here today. It's who's right and who's wrong. It would be a group of experts that could say, this is not right the way that you're putting a firewall over your OBD port after this state law passed. The reasoning for Maine is just what Jeff said, is you're running into issues in an ongoing basis here. So while you're putting together, you know, as I said, going into a brave new world of new technology and vehicles, you have to have this entity that's put together to make sure that it's done in the way that it's supposed to be implemented. And there's going to be bringing in both parties in order to do so. So
Is it just to make sure though, in Massachusetts, was an independent entity created?
yeah, it was not, but the law's tied up in court, but there's the independent entity is a part of the Massachusetts
Are you
question.
referring to 2012 or 2020?
2020.
I meant your question.
Well, when was the most recent Massachusetts legislation? Was it
2020.
2020? And so does the Massachusetts 2020 legislation call for creation of an independent entity?
Yes.
Because that, as I understand it, that legislation is in effect. I mean, I know it's tied up in court, but I don't think the court has enjoined the statute from going into effect. And I understand at least some manufacturers are maybe complying with Massachusetts law, maybe not, I don't know. But was the independent entity actually created?
No, because the law has not been
Okay.
put into any kind of a type of effect.
And the wording was slightly different as well, right? That it didn't describe an independent entity, it described entity unaffiliated with any manufacturer. So the manufacturers weren't allowed to create the entity, but the entity needed to exist in order to comply with the law. So it's kind of like a catch-22 situation.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Christina, did you have a question?
Yeah, just the more I'm listening and hearing, it's sounding like the idea was to be, even though the independent entity would be getting rulemaking authority and is charged with doing things like developing standards, to Brian's point about more prescriptive or less prescriptive, I'm getting the sense that what you had in mind was something less prescriptive because this is a dynamic industry where the technology is going to be developing and it's hard to be prescriptive because it's only going to capture a snapshot in time. So are you contemplating, or was the organization contemplating that it would be very high level rules that then the entity would be more responsible for figuring out how are those rules being complied with? Is there an end run? Are they being, stymied? And
Right.
so you'd have more of that kind of nuts and bolts work done at the compliance level, kind of step by step for each complaint rather than comprehensive prescriptive rules.
Yeah, I didn't see this as prescriptive. I think exactly like you said, I thought this would be to show, when you have an issue to get that issue resolved in terms of how deep you make this in the next working group, right? This working group is designed to set up the next entity. They would have to figure out the rules of the road, so to speak, in that nature. But we definitely didn't see this as prescriptive in terms of the type of technology you need to implement and the type of standards, et cetera. How the manufacturers get to where we need to go, getting car owners their information, I think is going to be figured out by this independent entity, which has that mechanical background and that engineering background.
Are there any other questions, comments, remarks people want to make sort of with respect to this issue of the purpose and function of the independent entity? Because if not, maybe we've run this one to ground, at least for now. I'm sure we'll end up talking about it some more in future meetings, but is there anything else at this point that people either want to ask or comment about?
I have a question.
Yeah, Lynn, go ahead.
I'm just looking at the enforcement mechanism, and this is, I think, kind of building on what Christina was talking about. Was it intended that this entity was somehow going to be sort of a pre-screening that someone with a complaint would go to prior to going to court? I mean, I see that the legislation has a phrase that the repair facility or the owner can file for damages, can file a civil action for damages directly, but there's also the enforcement by the Attorney General's office if the entity thinks there's a problem. So I'm sort of wondering how those mesh.
And how the Attorney General and the entity mesh?
I'm sort of putting the Attorney General and the entity on one slot, and then the individual vehicle owner or independent repair facility is it envisioned that if a vehicle owner or a repair facility feels that a manufacturer is not providing the access that they're supposed to be providing, is their first complaint to the entity or before they can go to court, or can they choose? Or is it that they go to the entity if they're seeking a broader sort of injunctive relief versus if they want damages, they go directly to court? Would the entity be able to award damages?
I think the way we saw it was that they would send their complaint to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General would use the entity as a resource to see exactly what kind of information, what kind of standards are missing, what exactly the nature of the complaint is. Because they really are a entity put together to make sure that this law is enforced rather than the enforcee of the law.
Also, Lynn, I think also that, the Attorney General's office might want to certainly get involved and investigate something that is pervasive. something where there are multiple complaints, but there may just be an individual complaint that the Attorney General's office, just for whatever reason, resources, time, whatever, is not going to deal with. This would give the consumer a mechanism by which to enforce the law. And I think both were really contemplated to allow an either or frankly, both path.
I just want to clarify as we're thinking about this, going back to something you said last time, Chris, about both looking at what the law explicitly states, but also potentially this group recommending tweaks to the independent entity if we feel like that might be a way. I'm just trying to effectuate the intent. Might be difficult if we look only at the language and we stick to that and we fight over what the sub parts of each part of the law are, but I also want to make sure that we're not abrogating our responsibility to look at the law and implement it. So can you talk a little bit about what you see the process being so that I'm not going down rabbit holes that are pointless?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. You know, I think you're right, Megan, that part of our report, I think, let me back up. I think, as I said, you know, in the first meeting, there are some ambiguities and unclarity in the statute. And I think part of the purpose of this working group, and not the only purpose, and maybe not the primary purpose, but part of the purpose is to try to figure out like what the intent was behind the statute. And then I think if we think that the statute might not be phrased in a way that makes clear that's what the intent is, I think part of our report can be to make recommendations to the legislature to clarify the intent. Like, just for example, and I think, Brian, this goes to one of your points, that if it's not clear that the standardized platform is supposed to be standardized across all vehicles of all manufacturers, as opposed to just like all of a manufacturer's vehicles, you know, I think we can make a recommendation that the statute be clarified to address that. So I think that's going to be part of our report probably. But on the other hand, I think you're also right that, you know, we also just need to make recommendations about how to create this independent entity. And so I don't know if this answers your question, but
we should be keeping both.
But I think we need to keep both in mind. I think we need to be thinking about how we want to structure this independent entity, and then to the extent to which we think there should be amendments to the statute potentially to sort of carry out the intent, or at least what we think should be sort of the proper objective.
Thank you.
All right, so I think why don't we move to the second topic, which is just kind of, I guess, what I would call like a primer or sort of like a 101 on vehicle generated data and telematics. We've had Tommy on the hot seat for a while, so let me ask and I think there are a couple of different folks here who might want to have some information that they want to present on this. So it's okay with you, Tommy. I'm going to just ask if there's anyone else who wants to get things started.
I can get going.
All right, I see
Yep.
Brian. Yep, that'd be great. Thanks.
We'll call this the introductory class, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions, and maybe these questions can lead to like further discussions in the future if we can't get through them today. Just wanted to go through some basic background on what is vehicle generated data, and then different methods to access the data, whether it's a local method to access the data, how you do it, what type of data is available, for what purposes is it used, and then the corollary of if I'm remotely interacting with the vehicle, how do I do that? What type of data, for what purposes, and also touching on some connected vehicle privacy notices. So modern vehicles can have many onboard electronic devices. They're typically called ECUs. Some cars can have 100 ECUs or more. These ECUs generate data, and the data is used in real-time control of the operation of the vehicle. Some of this data is utilized internal to the one controller. Some is transmitted to other parts of the vehicle to be used. And some aspects of this data might be recorded into memory. So not all generated information is actually recorded, only a subset is recorded. And not all of it is transmitted around the car, only a subset is transmitted throughout the car. But when it is recorded, it can be recorded either in the local memory of one controller, or it might be combined or derived or aggregated and stored in a centralized controller somewhere in the vehicle. And you'll notice in this diagram that there are different portions of a vehicle, and in the middle are different powertrain controllers, safety systems, the closure systems, and they all interact with each other. And then separate from those are the infotainment system, the telematics system, and the text is tiny, but OBD2 here at the top. And you'll notice that those are somewhat isolated by this gateway system. So that's intentional, that the infotainment system, the telematics system, the OBD2 system, these are all the interfaces to the outside world. And so it makes sense to have those interfaces be separate from the runtime control system of your engine. For example, if you had a shorted wire on the OBD port, you wouldn't want that to take down the control system that operates the engine, that would shut off the engine. So that they exist on different communication buses. And as we keep exploring these topics, I think there's some concepts that are important to keep in mind. For example, the difference between real-time data versus historic data, especially from a privacy perspective, or the difference between locally interacting with the vehicle versus remotely interacting with the vehicle. Actually, I think anytime we say wireless, we should probably switch that word out and talk about remote, because it doesn't actually matter whether it's a wired or a wireless connection. What matters is, are you physically present at the vehicle, or are you in a different location than the vehicle and you're interacting with an object that is that you are not in close proximity to. And so, yeah, these concepts are important to keep in mind, especially when we pair them together. For example, if a vehicle is primarily generating real-time data and the method of accessing that data is through a physical tethered connection, then the opportunity to monitor how the vehicle is using the owner, how the vehicle owner is using the vehicle is limited because the repairer is in possession of the vehicle at the time they're connected to it. But if instead someone is remotely connected to a vehicle, the vehicle can still be in possession of the owner, and real-time data can become historic data if that recipient of the data begins to record and collect and store that information over time. So although data might begin as real-time data, it can become historic data if it's recorded or stored over time. So first, we'll talk about local interactions. The primary means of interacting with a vehicle is the onboard diagnostic port. There may be more than one diagnostic port present on a vehicle, but the primary connection is via something generally called an OBD2 port. We've talked about it today. And the physical shape of this connector, its electrical characteristics, how and where it's located in the vehicle, the different communication protocols contained within it, they're all described in different standards that have been in place since 1996. And so how do you use the port? Basically, how do you obtain authorization to use the port? To use the diagnostic port, you first must have possession of the vehicle. The diagnostic port exists physically inside the interior of the cabin. So in order to physically access the port, you need the vehicle, but you also need access to the cabin, which implies that you have a key. Like, yes, you could break the window, but an alarm would trigger. And additionally, once you're inside the cabin, some signals or communication on the port might be tied to different vehicle power states. So meaning that the key needs to be turned on in the ignition that you essentially need the ability to start the car in order to be fully authenticated to interact with the port. So the combination of 1, having the vehicle, 2, having access to the cabin, and 3, having the ability to essentially start the car, which is the same as maybe being able to steal a car. These are the ways in which a vehicle repair bestows upon, the ways in which a vehicle owner bestows upon a repairer the privileges to interact with the vehicle, repair the vehicle. And I have a little asterisk here. A subset of commands available on the port may have additional prerequisites under the secure data release model. And you see this alluded to in the legislation in the exclusions section where it mentions immobilizer systems and security related systems. This is essentially saying that, okay, if the keys are a core part of authenticating that the person is authorized to utilize this port, then it makes sense that the ability to create new keys, like if I had no keys, if I could create a new key, then I could self-authorize to use the port or steal the vehicle. So the legislation acknowledges that there are portions of the security system of the vehicle that might need additional prerequisites under what's called a secure data release model in order to be accessed. What type of devices plug into these ports? Tethered harnesses. These connect to scan tools, to laptops, to mobile devices, and other equipment. There are devices that support local wireless connections like Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. These are near proximity wireless communication protocols. There are hybrid devices that support both a tethered connection and a near proximity local wireless connection. And there are also devices with embedded cellular satellite connections to transmit the information from the port to a remote location. What type of data is available? There's information about the inherent identity of the vehicle. This is stuff like the VIN, what powertrain type it has, the model type, the trim information. There's real-time data. Some of this is streamed continuously. Some has to be requested for. This can include vehicle speed, engine RPM, oxygen sensors, camera images. Lifetime data parameters being separate from real-time data. Lifetime data parameters represent aggregated information over the lifespan of the vehicle. The odometer represents the total distance the vehicle has driven over its life. That's an easy example of a lifetime data parameter. Diagnostic error codes, which are used to represent the presence of a malfunction or a fault, and may include additional information at the time the code was triggered. And historic data is really any of the above information, real-time data, lifetime data, diagnostic error codes that have been recorded over time or upon specific events. And what type of commands are available? So I'm separating data from commands, data being more passively read information, commands being active instructions to change the state of the vehicle. These can include commands to electronically interact with the vehicle, for commands that would otherwise be a manual user interaction, for example, honk the horn on the car or flash the lights. It can include commands to exercise components to, for example, tell pump number 3 to run to 5,000 RPM, or run a diagnostic test, or used in the process of initializing or calibrating replacement parts. If I fit a replacement part to a vehicle, I might need to calibrate it to such that it learns the physical position that it exists within the vehicle. Commands to reprogram or modify parameters within embedded controllers. And the last item is just wanted to mention that although I said that all these data represent more passively read information, the act of retrieving data is actually a command, because you are asking an electronic controller to initiate an instruction to retrieve some data from memory and reply back to you with that information. So even passive information is by definition interactive to some extent. I put some example data here. This is probably too short of or not illustrative. There's hundreds, thousands of signals available and other information available. Some for emissions, some for general diagnostics, some for other purposes. And how do technicians know how to interact with the port? So vehicle manufacturers, they make all their repair and maintenance information available, and their diagnostic software, their service manuals, their wiring diagrams, everything they make available to authorized dealer, they make available to independent repair, and they do this on their repair information portals. And this OEM One Stop exists as like an aggregation site to make it easier for independent repairers to look up essentially any manufacturer in the US and know, okay, this is where I go to get the repair and maintenance information from this vehicle manufacturer. And there also exist aggregation companies that take the service manuals from all manufacturers and bundle them all together so that a company can, rather than interacting with each of these different manufacturers, they might choose for their needs. Maybe they're a tire shop and they only really care about tire related information. They could go to a aggregation company to get that information all in one spot. What is the diagnostic port used for? Well, there are a variety of use cases and different types of users. All the information is readily available on the port. So data information intended for one use case or one user group in practice is accessible to anyone using the port. And I've listed some example users here. You can see a wide range. There's automotive repairs, customs officers at ports of entry, insurance providers, fleet operators, law enforcement, taxi companies, ride-hailing companies. And they each have different generalized needs. The automotive repairs, they're involved in repair and maintenance. Regulatory inspectors are interested in emissions-related testing and roadworthiness testing. Insurance providers, they want to monitor the driving style and habits of the owner of the vehicle to offer them usage-based insurance programs. So this information isn't from an unhealthy car, it's from a healthy car, and it's just about the way in which it's being used. And it actually overlaps with information that could also be used for repair and maintenance. So I think that's one of the challenges, is that like any information could be equally used for one purpose or another purpose. In the last discussion, we were talking about speed, the speed sensor or the seat occupancy sensor. If that component is malfunctioning in a vehicle, then a technician might be looking at that information in real time or historically to try and interpret why is this component malfunctioning and should I replace it, or is there a wiring problem? What do I need to do to repair this vehicle? So I'll pause there. I went through a lot about locally interacting with vehicles. And so before we go on to wireless remote interactions, maybe are there questions?
I mean, thanks, Brian. That was really, really interesting. Do any people have questions? I've got a couple, but I can hold if other folks want to ask stuff first. All right, I'll jump in. So Brian, like in terms of the equipment that an independent repair shop would need just to physically like access the OBD2 port, is that just like one piece of equipment that would work on every manufacturer's cars?
Let me see if I have a show and tell.
Turn your mic.
So this is an example OBD2 cable. This one happens to have an Ethernet plug on the end. So this plug plugs into the car. This plug plugs directly into a laptop. Other implementations, there exist VCI, a vehicle communication interface device, which is part of the OBD standards that exist, that the plug plugs into this device and this device plugs into the laptop. And so this type of harness is common across all vehicle manufacturers. And so it's more about what is it that I'm plugging into, like this laptop or a handheld device. And I can go to AutoZone and buy like a $15 code reader. If all I want to do is read certain codes and I don't want like a fully extensive system, or I can go to the vehicle manufacturer of my choosing and purchase their offering for a diagnostic scan tool, or I can go to a third-party scan tool company, which I believe there's a portion of this bill describes the that it's mandated that automotive repairs continue to make this information available to third-party automotive scan tool companies such that they can make like competitors scan tools that Ford or GM or Tesla can make their scan tool, and a different company can make a competitor scan tool, and that those competitor scan tools, rather than being Ford specific, they might be across a number of different vehicle makes and models.
Okay, so just to make sure I follow, so in terms of physically making the connection, it sounds like there's maybe like one or two or three sort of pieces of like harness types that you would use to plug in to the OBD port, and then the other end would plug it to either a computer or some kind of diagnostic device or something.
Right. I would say like typically one OBD harness, but that there do exist like other convenience-based features. This, I have to have a tethered wire going to my laptop. Maybe I want the laptop on the desk outside of the car. So this blue device here is essentially, it just plugs into the port and Bluetooth connection to my laptop, and I don't have to have the physical cable, but I don't necessarily need that. That's like a convenience offering. The minimum would be something like this harness.
Okay. And then so once I'm connected to the vehicle, it sounds like there's additional things that I need to have in order to be able to either like interpret the codes or to send signals to the vehicle. Is that
Right.
Is that
You would
fair?
need what it tends to be called a scan tool.
Okay.
And that tool is what is communicating with the vehicle. And this is what in the 2014 MOU is described as, well, all the capability that a vehicle manufacturer makes available to its dealerships, the same capability in the same form, same manner, same extent is made available to an independent repairer. So it's like parity, regardless of who is using the port.
Okay, and when you say made available, is there generally a fee or a cost associated with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Although some manufacturers offer low cost options and high cost options, some manufacturers offer free options. I happen to work at Tesla. We have an integrated scan tool built on the touchscreen in the car that is free to any owner or repairer. And then we have a off-board scan tool that has additional features, and that one has a subscription. And so there's a spectrum of no cost, low cost, and higher cost, depending on what it is that the person wants to do.
And so is it, if I'm an independent repair shop that wants to work on a variety of different kinds of manufacturers' vehicles, am I gonna have to sort of either like go to the aggregator or go to each individual manufacturer and sort of purchase?
Yeah, the
this
choice is
stuff?
up to you, but
Okay.
I would imagine they might go to an aggregator. It depends on what their business model is.
Yeah.
Some companies like, say, Costco or like the Costco Tire Center, they work on like any car that people bring in, but they also have a very specific thing that they're doing. So they go to an aggregation company that gives them whatever that it is that they need, and they don't have to pay any more or any less than what it is that they need.
Let me stop there. I think I saw a question there.
Just a question. I was trying to understand are there other ports that you're aware of on vehicles other than OBD ports that also provide data that you need to have access to? And do independent repair shops have access to those?
Under the 2014 MOU, if it's used for like repair and maintenance information, then yes, the independent repair shop would need to have the same access as the authorized dealer.
There are other ports though that
But
are
there
not,
are other ports, but
Right.
and maybe they're not actually used for repair and maintenance.
but they could be.
But they could be, but maybe that wasn't their intent. Like if I have a controller and I unscrew something and there's like on the PCBA, like a diagnostic header direct connection that the component supplier for that device on the PCBA in their factory overseas, they use that port to like originally provision this board to then sell to the vehicle manufacturer. Like, yes, that physical interface exists and people could send electrons into it and like reverse engineer it, but the vehicle manufacturer wasn't involved or didn't intend that to be used for repair and maintenance. And the key indicator is are they, the vehicle manufacturer, like publishing that information, like saying to use this port or how to use this port in their repair and maintenance information or to their dealers? If they are, then yes, it needs to be available to to their authorized dealers. Then it needs to be available to the independent repairs. But if the vehicle manufacturer never makes mention of it because they don't actually consider it as used for repair and maintenance, then it's not within the scope.
And so Brian, just so if I understand, I mean, and I know that you work for Tesla, and so maybe you can't answer this question comprehensively, but are you aware of motor vehicle manufacturers that aren't providing the ability for independent repair shops to access the diagnostic codes, send the signals that they need, sort of do all the things that a dealership repair facility would be able to do?
I'm not, and that's because of the MOU, like all the manufacturers agreed to make it available. Plus, the United States doesn't live in isolation. There exist overseas markets as well. In Europe, there's some regulations that essentially mandate the equivalent of the MOU. And so if a manufacturer is making a global designed vehicle to sell here, to sell in Korea, to sell in Europe, then it's just the same vehicle and it's equally compliant in all markets.
Just, can I ask a question on that? So they might all have access to the data. Do they all have access to the parts to make the repair?
I don't know for other
For
manufacturers.
yours?
Yeah, if the parts are used for repair and maintenance, like they should.
All
be
independent repair shops
available.
have access to those parts.
Yeah, either from the manufacturer or some parts aren't actually made or stocked by the manufacturers. You just buy it direct from the supplier.
Okay.
But that should be the intention. The MOU, I don't think actually talks about parts. This bill is the first bill
I
I've
was just
seen
kind of curious.
that actually mentions parts.
I just jump in for a second. And I think it's worth mentioning too, to that end, and we've said this before, many times on the record, that dealerships and manufacturers in the frame of being repairers as well, very much need independent repairers for the whole ecosystem to work. There simply aren't enough at dealerships in order for all those cars. So they're very supportive of the independent repair facilities because we need them to be out there and doing that work. And so I think that's another reason that typically the parts are made available, because we want people on the roads driving our cars to be able to fix them wherever they want to get them fixed.
Makes sense.
I have a question for Brian. I just want to make sure that I'm tracking you correctly. I may not be. I mean, talking about the OBD2 port, I mean, that port goes back to the 90s. It was federally mandated because of federal emission standards. I mean, that was the genesis of that. And I assume that primarily, since that law is still in place, that's primarily what it's mandated for now. So, I mean, these things exist, and that's one of the reasons, or the primary reasons, that they exist. When you say if it's used for diagnostic and repair, then it's provided to the independent shops. To me, the word if is important. So if it's not, how would the independent shop then get that information? Or am I just misunderstanding what you're saying?
Maybe an easier, or I hope it's a more clear explanation, is if it's provided to if it's used for repair and maintenance and it's provided to authorized dealer, then it needs to be provided to an independent repairer. And so if it's not being provided to an authorized dealer, then it must not be used for repair and maintenance, because they also need to repair cars. It's essentially provided to nobody if it's not provided to them or independent repairs.
I understood that the part of your presentation that we've seen so far is talking about, a diagnostic port in a vehicle. We've not yet gotten to the part of your presentation. We talk about Wi-Fi, telematics, cell service, things like that. But I'm just trying to understand whether or not it's possible for a manufacturer to provide that information telematically and not through an OBD2 port, therefore not allowing an independent mechanic to have access to certain data.
From maybe Beth knows the wording better than I do for the 2014 MOU or the more recent repair data sharing commitment. It had some words that essentially said, as long as it's provided somewhere at the car. Oh, sorry, it essentially said if that scenario was true that you're describing, that the information doesn't exist somewhere locally tethered to the car, and the only way to get it is to get it wirelessly, and it's used for repair and maintenance, then yes, the manufacturer has to make it available to the independent repairer.
And then can you describe for me how that process would work? I guess from a Tesla perspective, how does that happen? That you get, that the independent mechanic would get that information wirelessly from Tesla?
Yeah, we, so for Tesla, maybe not all manufacturers, all the remote repair and maintenance data and capabilities that we make available to our manufacturer affiliated dealerships, we also make available to independent repairers. So there's already parity for both groups. And I didn't prepare like information on how that works, but I can try to describe it. For us, the owner of the vehicle and the repair shop, they're communicating already, like and the repair workshop essentially initiates a request that goes to the owner of the vehicle. And to do that, they have to know who is the person and what is their contact information associated with like their ownership account of the vehicle. So it assumes that like the vehicle manufacturer has to maintain records of like this person owns this vehicle and this other person owns this vehicle, and more than ownership, that this person is authorized to dictate who has access to or who does not access to the telematics information coming from this car. So the request goes to the owner authorizes it, and they can say, yes, you can have access to this information for a fixed duration of time, and they can also revoke that access to the information.
So does the independent repair shop then, I assume it's a subscription model, and there's, the Tesla charges a fee for that.
Yeah, they can buy an annual, monthly, or daily subscription. So you can buy a one day use, and that's through our offering. But other third party scan tools have also integrated and or are integrating to have their offerings. And perhaps the second half of the presentation will make a little bit of this information more clear.
Sure. Does Tesla hold back any types of information from independents? In other words, you can subscribe to this, but not for that. And is the price the same?
Only if it's for, it has to be used for repair and maintenance information. If it's used for research and development information, not by the dealership, but by vehicles, by Tesla as the vehicle manufacturer, then it's kind of irrelevant. It's not relevant to our workshops. It's not relevant to the independent repair workshops. So that type of information is not available.
So you physically take the vehicle into your independent shop, and the independent shop then, with the owner's permission, contacts Tesla. Tesla then can provide that information for a fee to fix the vehicle. Is there any way to do that wirelessly? In other words, does the independent shop or mechanic have the ability to get that same information that Tesla would have available to it wirelessly?
Right. The vehicle doesn't have to come into the workshop.
No, I understand. Certainly for Tesla it doesn't, but would it for an independent
repair
as well?
shops, it does not.
Under the MOU, if it's provided to the dealership needed for maintenance and repair, and then it must be made available, including telematics. So telematics are in the MOU. So yes, it would have to be made available to them.
But not necessarily telematically, right? I mean, if it's provided, if there's diagnostic and repair information that's provided telematically only, so it's not being provided through the OBD port, does it have to be provided telematically to independent repair facilities?
I'd have to look at the exact language, but I mean, but what is clear in the language of the MOU is that it has to be provided.
Okay.
So I'm not sure that it really necessarily matters. My guess would be it would be the same mech, right? If they're using, let's say car dealership XYZ, is using Bluetooth as a system because that's what the brand is, probably that would be the same methodology that they would use for an independent repair, but I'm not sure. But they would have to provide it, and I don't believe it would be a, loophole in the law, for example.
So the MOU actually explicitly exempts remote diagnostics, which is the idea of telematics, right? The idea to remotely diagnose a vehicle without having to bring it into the shop. That is actually explicitly taken out of the MOU.
But in the updated repair data sharing commitment, it states like the scenario that it sounds like we're describing here of if there is information that isn't available when you're physically at the car, the only way to get it is via telematics, and that it's used for repair and maintenance, that the manufacturers agreed, like, yeah, this information will be made available to independent repairs.
So that to us is not a level playing field, right? That's not what this ballot question is about. So for our purposes, the ballot question is about car owners getting their information, sharing it with an independent repairer or dealer, not if manufacturers give it to the dealers and there's no other way to do it for the independent repairer, then they get it after that. That
Maybe let's go
kind of
through,
defeats the purpose of it.
We'll go through the telematics portion and then we
Okay.
can come back to these good questions. So many vehicles now equipped with wireless systems. These are sometimes called telemetry or telematics. You can think of these as equivalent to the cellular 4G or 5G or Wi-Fi chips or satellite connections that are contained within your phone. And in many cases, the wireless chips in the vehicles are the exact same chips being used in shipping with the latest model phones. What is the telemetry used for? It's used for convenience and entertainment features, like providing streaming music or video to the vehicle, or digital voice assistance, or generating local hotspots. It's used by the vehicle to know information about its surrounding, or to have other data services like routing and navigation, weather, real-time data traffic, or sorry, real-time vehicle traffic, maps. It's used to provide software updates to the vehicle, to change vehicle features, to launch new capabilities, for cybersecurity updates, to enhance vehicle functions, or to execute recalls. General telephony, just ability to make phone calls, send and receive text messages. Emergency response services use it. And this includes not just a call to the emergency response services, but also information such as location, airbag deployment, how bad was the collision, that's this change in velocity, the number of fastened seatbelts, so that the emergency services know how many occupants were in the vehicle when they provide dispatch. Onboard applications running on the infotainment system. You might have heard of Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. These can have access to real-time vehicle data, driving data, vehicle location, and they can also be transmitting this information to their own digital services. Offboard applications like mobile apps. Most manufacturers now offer a mobile app, and users can use the mobile app to remotely start the car, set the cabin temperature, monitor charging, a variety of services, and some amount of maintenance reminders and remote diagnostics like miles since last oil change or low tire pressure alerts. So what is the type of data available? Generally, this is a subset of what is available locally on the diagnostic port. And this data tends to be more in the area of providing digital services to a healthy car, as opposed to representing the active repair or troubleshooting use case of the diagnostic port that physically exists in the car. So information like the identity of the car, the speed, accelerator, gear, brakes, all this stuff. I, as a vehicle owner, I'm consuming this information on my mobile app, and this mobile app could be provided by the manufacturer or a third party. I can see the currently playing song. So the currently playing song, title, asset, genre. I change radio volumes, look at the radio presets, look at the media sources, information from audio or visual sensors in the car, so cameras or microphones. For example, if a vehicle has a voice assistant and that assistant is in an active listening state, the microphone is recording information, potentially converting it to text, but it can be transmitted via telematics to another location. Autonomous driving data, images from exterior or interior facing cameras, LiDAR, ultrasonics, radar mapping. And so the first group was about data, the last one, commands. Wanted to highlight especially on the ability to execute commands remotely on a vehicle. It's like orders of magnitude, far fewer commands than when you're locally tethered to the car. And they primarily are focused in the area of user commands to digitally interact with the vehicle rather than manually interact with the vehicle. So they're not present are the commands I mentioned earlier about exercising components or running diagnostic tests or running calibration routines. There needs to be a much higher barrier to digitally controlling a vehicle when that control is done remotely rather than when you're in close proximity. So even a diagnostic test can be invasive as it's physically changing or might be physically changing or moving portions of the car. If I run a remote test that is checking the seat and it moves the seat all the way forward and all the way backwards, if there's a person or child that's going to be wedged by the moving seat, that is problematic. So those types of commands aren't listed here. Even commands that are listed, like we need to be mindful of them. If a technician is actively working on a car in a workshop and their head is under the hood, it wouldn't be pleasant for them if the horn was triggered remotely or the engine was remotely started. So typically vehicle manufacturers allow a vehicle to be placed in a repair mode that temporarily disables such remote commands for safety of the technician. So what is this data used for? It's used by the vehicle owner to view the remote data from the manufacturers or a third-party mobile app. It's used by the vehicle owner to interact with their vehicle remotely, to lock it, unlock it, remote start, set the cabin temperature, interact with the infotainment system, set a destination, see the destination that it's already driving to. Insurance companies to monitor driving styles and habits to offer usage-based programs. Vehicle manufacturers use this data from the vehicle to conduct troubleshooting, research and development, cybersecurity, and other obligations that are inherent to being the provider of the connectivity infrastructure and the vehicle operating system. But typically this information is sent in a de-identified or anonymous form. Research institutions, law enforcement, vehicle listing sites, and used car sellers, the vehicle identity information is actually quite valuable to know what's the color of this car, can I get an image asset of the car, how many miles does this car have on it, what is the type of the powertrain on this car, such that they can more easily sell the vehicle on their website. And not all of this data is coming from the vehicle. Like we shouldn't think of it as all the same. There's an important distinction in the nature of the data. For example, whether is data associated to the VIN or whether is data coming in an anonymized or de-identified form. So for many of the use cases I listed, it's not actually relevant to know the specific vehicle the data originated from. For example, if your role or your responsibility is the upkeep of the pipeline for how streaming music gets to a vehicle, it's not actually relevant to know what is occurring on one particular vehicle. Instead, you're paying attention to the fleet in its aggregate, and in such scenarios, the best practice is for the data to be fully anonymous or in a de-identified form. Additionally, given the sensitive nature and private nature of VIN-associated data, the best practice is to route the data directly to the user. So meaning when I look at the real-time data on my mobile app about the vehicle I own a car, and my wife and I, we can equally see what's occurring on the car, or I can see the location of the car. This information tends to be coming essentially directly to me with very minimal data processing by the infrastructure in between, and it can be sent in an end-to-end encryption such that only this device is the one capable of decrypting the data to view it. The data processor, like the vehicle manufacturer that is administering the pipeline, is not actually able to look at the information. For example, I can look on my phone and see the live cameras of my vehicle. Many cars have this feature now. And I can look at those images. The vehicle manufacturer cannot actually look at those images. They're encrypted, and only this phone can decrypt those images. So a variety of technologies work together to provide connectivity to vehicles. And totally understand it's very complicated, especially the data privacy aspects are super complicated. And but the connected vehicles are installed with factory installed modems that's wirelessly transmitting this information. So vehicle manufacturers have an obligation to inform potential customers and current customers of the existence of this installed equipment. What is the type of the data that is transmitted? Who are the recipients of the data? For what purpose is it being used? For how long is it retained? Under what conditions is it further disclosed? And how to activate, deactivate, or customize data preferences, because maybe the vehicle owner doesn't want this information to be transmitted, or maybe they never opt in to activate such services when they purchase the vehicle. And consumers don't actually need to purchase a car from one manufacturer or another manufacturer. They can shop around. And the connected services and features that do exist, or what's disclosed in the vehicle privacy notices, is part of like the total equation of someone's decision to purchase like from manufacturer A or manufacturer B. And in these notices, it's also listed that when a vehicle owner chooses to disclose their data to a third party, or they instruct the vehicle manufacturer to disclose the data to a third party. Like, for example, I use the Tesla mobile app, but there are other mobile apps from third parties that have access to the same information as long as the vehicle owner it authorizes them to have access to the information. That the vehicle manufacturer makes it clear that when information is being provided to a third party, it's now the terms and conditions of this third party and their privacy policies that apply, not the policies of the vehicle manufacturer, like for that data that's being disclosed. All right, I went through a bunch. Questions?
As soon as we made available.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, what was the question?
It'll be made available. I took some notes.
The PowerPoint? Yeah, I was gonna ask you that, Brian. I'm wondering if you could send that to Katrina and then she could post it to our website?
Yeah, I'll find a way.
Okay. All right, do folks have questions?
Well, so just before Brian kept going on this, I didn't get a chance, wanted to clarify one point, which is that when we say that the updated data sharing, requires that the information be necessary for repair, otherwise made available to the dealership, we do not mean that the dealership gets it first and then gets a first crack at the opportunity to fix the car. We mean that in the normal course of business, that is information that the dealership would have authority and the ability to receive. So as long as the dealership does, then there would be parity allowing the independent repairer to have that information. That's what that language means. I just wanted to clarify.
And actually, maybe that's a good reminder. The majority of the stuff I talked about is actually unrelated to, it doesn't tend to be used for vehicle repair and maintenance, but that it's used for these other purposes. But it's the same signals that when you are at a vehicle, you're using it for repair and maintenance. So that is the difficult part from a privacy perspective of, is it appropriate for this information to be disclosed to automotive dealerships? So a lot of this information is not actually being disclosed to the vehicle dealerships. When I say vehicle manufacturer, I mean the vehicle manufacturer itself, that they're doing research and development on new vehicles, on new products, on autonomous driving, on better infrastructure, better features. They're engaged in using this data not for the purpose of repair and maintenance, but for these other purposes.
Brian, can you just go to I think the slide that was before this one? Yeah, so, but I think you had the right one up before.
This one?
Yeah, that one. So I didn't see anything in there that said that wireless telemetry is used for diagnostic
Maybe the
information.
last line,
Okay, yeah, okay.
very briefly.
Yeah, very, okay. So, is it, so, I mean, let me just play out I don't know if this is like a realistic situation or not, but I think you'll sort of get the idea. Let's say that I've got a car and it's not driving right. Can I call up like the dealership, say, and say, hey, my car's not driving right? Do they have an ability to, like, from the dealership without me bringing my car in, do they have the ability to through the wireless telemetry, take a look at some of the diagnostics and figure out, maybe based on that, like, why my car's not driving right?
Depends on the vehicle manufacturer, I think is the short answer.
Okay.
So, but for Tesla, the answer would be yes, the Tesla dealership can do that, and the independent repair dealership can equally do it. That they both have access to the same data and same commands.
And that's for Tesla, but do you know whether that's true for other auto manufacturers?
I don't know the extent to which it's true across different manufacturers, but again, I would say if that's, because to some degree, it just depends on the uptake of the technology, right? How fast are they transitioning over to wireless? But again, if that is information that is necessary to, even if it's remote, it would be required to be provided to the independent repair.
So one thing that I've heard, and I don't know, I guess wondering if either of you can comment on this, is that there's diagnostic and repair information that dealerships can access telematically, but that is only made available to independent repair facilities through the OBD2 port. And that the downside of that is that it gives an advantage to the dealership because they can diagnose the car before the customer even brings it in, and then make the whole sort of customer experience much easier because, for example, they can have the part already ready to go when the customer comes in and gets it fixed. And I'm just wondering if either of you can comment on like whether or not that is sort of a scenario that might play out, maybe not with Tesla, but with other manufacturers.
I guess I'm trying to figure out why the independent repairer wouldn't, in that instance, have the same information to the data that the dealership has, because they can have it under the sharing.
Well, I guess my question, and maybe this gets to my question, which is, I think there's two different things going on. It's one thing to say you have access to all the same diagnostic and repair information that dealerships have, versus saying you have access to all that information and you can access it in the same way that dealerships can. So like it might be that all of the diagnostic and repair information is made available only through the OBD2 port for independent repair facilities, but the dealerships get an advantage of being able to access it through telematics.
I believe as right now, dealerships don't have the ability to go in and diagnose a vehicle. Usually what happens when someone's driving a car, check engine light may come on, and they'll call the dealership. We have to bring it in, plug it in.
Yeah.
And find out we can't go in there and see exactly what problem is with the check engine light. There's no way of doing that yet.
Okay.
But no, and if sometimes you'll have someone say, low tire pressure. We don't get that information. And that goes to the car, who's ever driving the vehicle. And they would call us or stop by some repair facility and have air put in their tire. So we don't get any of that.
So it sounds like, Jack, for your dealerships, you're still getting the diagnostic information sort of the old fashioned way through the OBD2 port with the vehicle actually physically in your shop.
Well,
is that?
Yes, but if a customer has a problem with his vehicle and it comes up on his screen,
yeah,
they have to notify us. And then we go from there.
Okay.
We don't interact with that at all. I don't know if that will ever come, but that would be a tough thing to be able to do. You'd have to have a person sitting somewhere reading a screen. And if you're a dealership that sells thousands of vehicles,
Yeah.
it would be almost impossible to manage type of thing. But as of right now, as far as I know, we don't get any of that information at all.
Chris, I think the video, I think the video would be a great segue here in terms of what we mean by the future of fixing vehicles, remote diagnostics, being able to call a dealership to make a repair versus if this were to go.
Okay, yeah. So why don't we'll get to that in a second, and let me just make sure that. Yep.
I know sometimes the manufacturer can send out something and actually update what we call a flash. and update, a certain item in the vehicle to make it run better, but we can't do that.
Okay.
Yeah, just to maybe dot your I and cross your T, I think part of maybe what you're experiencing, there's an organization called CarMD that puts out data every year around check engine lights, and by and large, 90+% of the check engine lights across the United States are for vehicles 2007 to 2014. So that's the majority of what's actually being seen. What they're not seeing are, the 2020, 2021, 2022 vehicles for the most part when you look at it in aggregate. I can't speak specifically to your dealership, but I know CarMD puts out that data. And that's why, a lot of people are saying, well, we don't exactly see this issue yet because they're all working on 2007 to 2014 vehicles. That's where the majority of check engine lights are today, not what's coming at the tail, so to speak.
Okay, makes
Can I
sense.
just make one point too? I did just want to make one point. I mean, one of the reasons that that many manufacturers, I think to some degree, Tesla is probably, out ahead of some in terms of what it does, is a choice, right? It's a risk choice, and some of it is a cybersecurity risk choice. The more you start transmitting wirelessly, regardless of whether or not you're transmitting from the manufacturer to the dealership or to an independent repairer or whatever it is, the astronomically higher likelihood that data is going to be intercepted. So there are serious cybersecurity implications that each company takes into consideration. I think when they think about how do they want to do diagnostics on a car, how do they want dealerships to do it, what information do they only want to have access to versus the dealership? And again, that's cybersecurity based.
Cybersecurity and privacy policy.
Yeah.
It's not just the technology of how the data is transmitted, but once it is received by an individual, what they do with it. Are they looking lawfully at the data? Are they retaining the data? Are they misusing the data? So it's actually the business operation of and the business practices and making sure that people are adhering to these things is an important part of empowering remotely retrieved data to be looked at, and that's where it becomes challenging to imagine like the smaller workshops or companies. They'll also need to make these considerations for consumer data privacy.
Yeah.
I know that Tommy has a presentation. Are there any other questions or comments with respect to Brian's presentation before we go to Tommy? All right, I guess, Tommy, take it away.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty self-explanatory video, but this is a video that BMW actually rolled out 3 years ago regarding kind of the real life usage of telematics. I think we all know the future of fixing vehicles is remotely, and it's whether it's a diagnosis or a remote repair. And I think this vehicle does a great kind of real life example of the ability of telematics and really where manufacturers are going with that technology.
Hi, I'm Jeremy, and today I'll show you a BMW tech solution that drives us forward. Our cars are a daily companion, and this happened to me recently. My girlfriend and I were celebrating our anniversary. I had prepared something special, but I was already running late. I need to get her some flowers. Something's not working. Normally, my day would have been over, as I would now have to drive to the BMW garage. In the future, I will be able to save myself this effort and have my car checked with remote diagnosis. First, I will call my BMW partner. Hello? Yes, I have a problem with my vehicle. It's not working properly. He identifies me with my personal information and the vehicle identification number. For data protection purposes, I have to approve his request to access my vehicle. Once I've approved, the service partner can see what's wrong.
I accept it.
The service expert was right. There's a crack in my park sensor. But how does BMW know that I have a crack in the front left park sensor? Until now, you had to visit the BMW garage for every problem. The vehicle was then checked intensively and even wired up for error diagnoses. In the future, this will be much easier. The BMW Group uses the mobile connection of the vehicle. Soon, the process will be started with the click of a mouse. Via cloud, the garage can carry out the remote diagnosis of the vehicle. However, access to the vehicle is only granted after the customer's approval. The diagnostic tree is shown as if the car were standing next to him at the garage. You can see that the park sensor is not working. Next to the error, the tool is already showing repair options. This includes the order commands for the replacement parts. For the remote diagnosis to work, everybody at BMW Group joined forces. This means that IT, engineering, international markets, and BMW dealerships work together. This is direct service. First, I was able to skip the diagnosis appointment at the BMW partner. Then, my visit took less time because all the parts had been ordered and everything was prepared in advance. As promised, a future tech solution that drives us forwards. See ya.
Tommy, is there anything else you want to add or?
No, it's obviously a total goofy of a video, but I think it really just articulates kind of where the technology in vehicles is going. As you can see, obviously, the only way that the man in the video could go is to a dealership, not able to share that with an independent repair shop. But you're really looking at what this bill or what this ballot question would do if implemented. How we see it.
And do you have a sense of the extent to which manufacturers, because it sounds like for the BMW, it sounded like it was like in the future. So it didn't sound maybe like that was happening yet, but maybe it is, I don't know. But do you have a sense to the extent to which car manufacturers have started to like implement this kind of technology?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, to Elizabeth's point, I think it's in different places depending on the manufacturer, depending on the make and model. I know that I drive a 2024 vehicle. I won't say the manufacturer in case they decide to shut off some telematic features for me, but they're all in different places. I know my car, when I have an alert that shows up, it says go to the closest dealership, which is 2.1 miles away, or you can go to the other dealership, which is 4.5 miles away, and then goes right down the line. But it never says that you can share any information with an independent repair shop. It also doesn't tell you kind of what's wrong with the car. But I think you can see the importance of making sure that there's a level playing field as you go into this technology where there will only be remote diagnostics. That's the future of fixing vehicles.
Any questions?
Yeah, I do have a question, Brian. We're talking about the diagnostic side of things. Are there any repairs so assuming the independent repair shop gets the same level of diagnostic information, are there any repairs they can't perform that Tesla can perform?
If all the same tools and information and parts and capabilities are at the dealership and the independent repair workshop, then it should be equivalent capability.
So there's no Tesla only parts?
If there shouldn't be if they're used for repair and maintenance information.
Okay.
But yeah. So this BMW example I think was interesting. My understanding is they have this feature partially enabled in Europe. I don't know about North America. The European market benefits from additional non-automotive sector specific oversight from GDPR, this very large over-encompassing and very structured approach to how companies and individuals access private data, whether it's from a vehicle or a device or any personally identifiable information. So I do think we have to recognize that there exists other foundational infrastructure in that maybe make this type of a video possible in one market and make it more difficult in a different market. And that this legislation is not a consumer data privacy oversight bill, and it's also automotive specific.
But I want to explore a little bit with Brian, this concept of privacy. You mentioned the GDPR, which is the European privacy law. There's similar laws in effect in the United States and California. For example, the CPRA, which I'm sure Tesla complies with, and you might speak to that. But that, that's about the consumer having access to knowing what data the company has, what the company is doing with that data, and what they're using it for, and whether or not they're monetizing it, and whether or not then they can then opt out of those things. So if the consumer doesn't want you to sell my data to my insurance company because I don't want them to know how I'm driving, they can do that. And the law in California at least obligates you to do that. But I'm not connecting the dots between the privacy issue that you mentioned and diagnostic and repair data. Can you connect those dots for me? Because I'm struggling to do that.
If I subscribe to data from, let's imagine I'm a independent workshop or just a person, and I subscribe to data from a vehicle, and let's say that data is the vehicle speed, and I can see the speed in real time. And as I'm receiving this information, I write it down, like electronically write it down, record it. And now speed over time. It's implied when the speed is 0, the vehicle is parked. And when the speed is greater than 0, the vehicle is driving. From that data alone, I can infer by looking across the course of a day or a week at what times of day the vehicle owner leaves their house in the morning, when they get to work, when they leave their work, when they go back to their home, if they made any other stops along the way. And so although vehicle speed is relevant to the world of repair and maintenance, if I'm trying to troubleshoot the speed sensor, it can also be like misused in a way that is like harmful for consumer data privacy, especially when bundled with other types of information to know the number of occupants or what destination they went to. So that's where, in addition to the importance of what information is made available, it's also important to consider how the information is being consumed and retained.
Is there a way to segregate that data? For example, if I'm having difficulty with the braking system in my vehicle, and I take it to whatever shop, whether it's a dealership or whether or not it's my independent mechanic, and is there a way for me to provide access to the dealership or to the mechanic for that information that relates to my braking system issue, but no other issues? Or are you saying when you provide access, you're providing access to the universe of information that the motor vehicle captures for a variety of purposes?
Which data is disclosed to like different entities? Is this possible to have like a certain set of data go to this group, like the anonymous data going to the vehicle manufacturer and the VIN specific data going to the insurance provider? So that's an example of splitting it. But one of the challenges I think that exist in your example of, it sounds like it puts an obligation on the vehicle owner to diagnose their own vehicle to some extent, to decide what data to disclose or not disclose, that they chose to disclose just the braking information, which makes it seem like they know what is relevant to the braking system. And maybe that's challenging.
It may be, and they may or may not know. I just use that example as the first thing I thought of. But I guess my question was, is there a way to segregate that information so that the consumer, the owner, has a choice that I'm going to provide information that's related to the diagnostic and repair of my issue, to the exclusion of all other personally identifiable information, or where I left from this morning, or how much I weigh, or whether I take left turns really fast, or those kinds of things. I guess that's question number one. Then number two, if I'm the consumer, it's my data, it's my information, and I want to give Brian, I want to give you permission to know that information. Is there a data privacy concern if I do? Does that raise an issue?
For your first question, is it possible to segregate data? Sure, I guess anything's possible if we create it in the future. Or it sounds like it's possible. It's just more complex and puts some amount of additional burden on the vehicle owner to understand what information is relevant or not relevant, and to whom to give it to and not give it to, which maybe is similar to the second challenge of modern vehicles, modern consumer electronic devices, modern web services are pretty complicated. It is challenging to like sufficiently disclose to a consumer what it is that they're actually consenting to when they are agreeing to a privacy policy on a website, whether or not it's for a vehicle. I'm just talking about like privacy policies generally. Definitely, maybe we've got the ACLU folks and other privacy folks on the call that could speak to this better than I can about the challenges with sufficiently informing the public on what it is that they what it is that's occurring or that they're consenting to.
Sure.
I mean, I think I'm having sort of the same trouble connecting the dots as well, because and maybe I'm missing something, but in terms of privacy protections, what's the difference between allowing a consumer to authorize, Tesla or an authorized dealer to have access to that information versus allowing the consumer to allow an independent repair shop to access that data? Like,
So I can speak for Tesla. We allow both. We already have parity.
right.
So
But
my problem with
where's
the
the
bill
privacy
is not,
concern though?
my problem with the bill is not the creating the level playing field. It's the creation of this independent entity to have like a very prescriptive way to administer access, and depending on how you interpret it, whether the data is routing through the entity and whether they're the one choosing, yes, this person gets access or this other person doesn't get access, or they are certifying independent repairers to be allowed to access data remotely. I imagine independent repairers don't actually want to become certified licensed workshops in the state of Maine. I don't believe they are today, but perhaps there's a need to do that, that the independent entity is charged with declaring that, okay, this workshop has gone through all the training about data privacy, that they are going to safeguard this data, that they have the right cybersecurity protections in place on their own IT laptops. Like data breaches can occur not just on the vehicle manufacturer, but on like a laptop in a vehicle workshop as well. So I am in support of the level playing field. It's the portions of the bill related to the independent entity that seem problematic.
But is that just because the concern that this is something that the independent entity is going to have to be cognizant of, that it's going to have to make sure that whatever standards or protocols it adopts are going to have to be sufficiently protective of consumer privacy, so that
Sounds like it puts a liability burden on the independent entity of rather than on the vehicle manufacturer. Today, like I view the liability is on Tesla or Ford or BMW or whoever, that when they have a data breach, when there's a privacy disclosure, they are the ones that get penalized by public opinion, by regulators, by whoever is relevant to the conversation. This law, I think, accidentally shifts the liability from the vehicle manufacturers to this independent entity. And I don't actually think that's good, because then manufacturers can be like, oh, we adhere to all these standards. This is the entity administering access when a data breach occurred. Well, we adhere to everything, like not our problem. Actually, I think it should be their problem, and it's a better feedback loop.
Just follow up on that. Yes, and I would say the National Highway Transportation System Security Administration also thinks it should be their responsibility, meaning the manufacturers, because it's one person to go after, if there's a liability issue. I think it depends. I mean, through our general reading of the law, and you're talking about, an independent entity that has to establish and administer access to vehicle generated data, which we interpret to mean essentially some degree of holding data, or at least administering access to some entity, to some software that is holding data. And perhaps that's not, I'm now hearing that's, perhaps not the intent. But under that reading of it, I think the privacy concerns then become what Brian has identified, which is that the state essentially steps into the role, or the independent entity, to the degree that it's related to the state, of holding that data. And if there's a breach, it's going to be, the liability is going to be on whoever established the rules and regulations that set up the platform on which the data was breached.
And I actually don't see a future where the independent entity is absolved of any data routing through it, even if absolutely no vehicle data routed to the independent entity. Well, if it's administering the access, the authorization of this workshop can connect to this car. There's some fundamental information it needs to know about this workshop is housed at this address. It has these employees. The whole workshop is being granted access to VIN number 5 owned by this individual, which means this entity also needs to know that this vehicle, who its owner is, who is that owner actually authorized to further bestow telematics access to others. And within the workshop, it's got 50 employees, the account information for each of the employees, and account information for the workshop as a whole. It seems hard to imagine, based on the wording in the law, that the independent entity wouldn't be the one administering this type of authorization account related information, which is now the private information of the vehicle workshop, of names of its employees, how many employees, the address that it works at, how many vehicles did it repair this month, how many vehicles did it repair last month. Yeah.
So I think as we go about here, and obviously there's a lot of folks from different stakeholder groups in this, 84% of people voted for this. So this group is to put together the next entity that is going to put this law implement this law in a safe and secure way. We know it can be done in a safe and secure way. There's been a number of cybersecurity experts that have talked about these issues, have talked about closed systems versus open systems. I mean, we're happy to bring them in, but this is what Maine voted for. And so the idea of the entity is actually more important as all of these issues arise, because this isn't just the manufacturers getting in a room. This isn't just the aftermarket. This is stakeholders getting involved that have an issue in ensuring that this is done in a safe and secure way.
The ballot question that went to the voters, maybe somebody has it.
The actual language of the question.
Yeah, the language of the question, like what people saw when they voted, is very different than all of this. When 84% of voters are voting on this thing, it's like, yeah, they're agreeing owners, independent repairers should have equivalent access to repair and maintenance information. And it sounds like they're also agreeing they should have equivalent access to telematics information. And they said, yep, that's 84% of people want that. It doesn't seem like they went and read this information about the creation of a state-run or government-run agency that has no opt-out provisions, that is now going to house information about independent repairs, house information about who owns which vehicles.
It doesn't say anything about housing information. It's actually an owner authorized platform. That's what it says in the language. And I think this entity's job is to show ways in which it can be implemented with all stakeholders at the table. That's the idea. I think voters would love to know that as they're getting access to their driving information, that there's other eyes on this, putting the standards in place.
So mean, I want to go back to Megan's comment earlier about the potential changes that we could recommend be made to the independent entity, setting up the independent entity. And I mean, I think there seems to be no question about the intent and of leveling the playing field. The cybersecurity issues that you're raising really seem to hinge on how standardized access is provided. And I guess a question I have for you, Brian, is assuming that the independent entity, I mean, I understand there's ambiguity in the law. You know, you all read it one way, they read it another way in terms of whether the entity itself is going to be housing any data. You also talked about, so that's one issue. I think that, you know, if that would alleviate some cybersecurity concerns, still level the playing field, keep the liability on the manufacturer for any kind of data breach. I mean, I think that's one thing to talk about. But you were also talking about other types of data that would be at risk, like information about the repair facilities. And so, I mean, I guess my question for you is, do you see any implementation of the intent to level the playing field by making sure that independent repair facilities get equal access to what they need to repair these cars without the independent entity holding data that raises cybersecurity risks?
Yes, I would say that was what LD 1911 was, which we fully supported, and so did the dealers.
Yeah, LV 1911 seemed to include, it kept provisions for enforcement, and it kept the wording about level playing field. It removed the portion around the independent entity. The independent entity doesn't actually need to be the enforcement agency. The Attorney General or others can be the enforcement agency. So, yeah.
That's not really my question, though,
Okay.
I think. I mean, I understand there was a different model that would have removed the risks because you removed the independent entity. I guess what I'm getting at is, could there be a model where there's an independent entity that doesn't actually hold data that poses a cybersecurity risk? You know, an independent entity that still serves some kind of a compliance function, still serves a function of providing guardrails and standards for how access needs to be provided without actually holding confidential or.
Some group has to hold the account information of the independent repairers. And unless we're saying that each vehicle manufacturer can have a separate account management system, and if so, then that means I, as an independent repair workshop, have to go to Ford to set up my account there. I have to go to Tesla to set up my account here, to BMW to set up my account here, which I don't think is what was desired or the intention. So it sounds like the intention is that somewhere there exists a consolidated set of accounts about the users that get authorized to access the data. And then in addition to that, like, foundational piece of information that needs to exist, there's another piece of foundational information about which person is authorized for which vehicle to grant access to others. Like, essentially, who is the vehicle owner, which is different than who is the vehicle registered to at the DMV. This is like who has the digital rights to grant access to the telematics system to different groups. So that's like two pieces of information that have to exist somewhere. And if it wants to be standardized across all manufacturers, and then it has to exist in some centralized repository, and something has to administer that centralized repository.
It sounds like we're debating again. I mean, this is voted on and now it's about implementing it. And these are all concerns. I think you'd be perfect for the entity that's putting together here, because as you showed us, Tesla is already rolling out an example of this. And, you know, we look forward to showing our technical experts in our presentation to show you ways that this can be done in a safe way, because, as I said, that's what this working group is for, is to put this entity together and put the guidelines in place to make sure this is what people voted for.
Chris, can you maybe just clarify for us? Yeah, can you turn your mic off? I know Mr. Hickey wasn't at the last meeting, but I think we went through the goals that were outlined in the resolve. And I think they do provide some flexibility to this working group as to how best to implement the law, not prescriptive of there being an independent entity. Am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I said at the first meeting is that even though this independent entity in the citizen initiated bill is characterized in a certain way, I think our task is really more is broader than that, and it's to look at some kind of entity that can implement the law that not necessarily is the independent entity model. So it could be, for example, a state regulatory agency, or some kind of, state agency that's staffed with state employees that, calls upon experts for technical expertise. So I don't think we're tied to this sort of ad hoc, unpaid, volunteer type entity. Is that kind of what you're asking, Elizabeth? Yeah.
Thank you.
So because it might be, and we haven't gotten there yet, but it might be at the end of the day, we decided it makes more sense for there to be some state agency that sort of administers. And, we haven't asked you yet, Tommy, how you feel about that. I don't think we need to get to that yet, but I just don't think we should be tied to the model that's set forth in the initiative. If our charge is to make recommendations to the legislature about what the best way to sort of set up this entity is.
No, while I understand that the goals are the goals. I think we've laid forth the goals, and now, questions of cybersecurity or good idea, bad idea, those are technical questions, right? Those are for folks that have the expertise to do so. And while we can have our suggestions and our recommendations, it's more of finding yes than posing questions of what could. That's all.
I think in a perfect world, people would have had these discussions, and those who are stakeholders in these issues would meet face to face and have these discussions and explain to each other why it is that their relative positions are not good, or why this makes sense or why that doesn't make sense. For whatever reason, that hasn't happened here. And we're at where we're at, where we have a referendum language that's passed, and we're trying to see if there's a way to implement it. And I don't know that, I think this working group is important to ask some of these questions to get to the next group where the technical experts really sit down to talk about those policy issues, not particularly whether or not data is going to be housed, because I don't think that's included in A, B, and C in paragraph 2. But regardless of that, to see what is possible and what is not possible before we get to any conclusions about what's appropriate and what's not. I think calling for the question maybe is a little premature, but in a perfect world, we could have worked that out. It hasn't happened. But I hope over the next course of meetings, it will help facilitate a discussion between stakeholders that might get us closer.
So let me propose this. We've been going for over 2 hours now, and I think people are probably starting to get a little tired. So I'm wondering, unless there are other sort of questions or things that folks want to talk about, I want to maybe spend a few minutes talking about what our next sort of meeting or meetings should look like. Does that make sense to go there at this point? So, and I'm just speaking for myself, and I don't know whether other people sort of share this, but what I've heard today is that independent repair shops already have access to all of the same kind of diagnostic and repair information that dealerships have. Although there does seem to be maybe like a cost or burden issue because they might have to go to different manufacturers to get that access. And I've also heard that telematics really is not being used that much, at least not at the moment, for doing sort of remote diagnostic stuff. And so at least what would be helpful for me at the next meeting would be either to hear from members of the working group, or if there are, independent repair facility owners or operators who could come in here and tell us if there is a problem or not. Because, I've sort of heard anecdotal evidence that there are problems, that there's certain things that can't be fixed because they don't have access to the right diagnostic tools or the right codes, or they get the codes, but they don't know what the codes mean. And so at least for me, it would be helpful just to hear firsthand from folks who actually are working on cars to sort of get a sense about whether this is an issue and sort of what they see as the obstacles. I don't know. Does that make sense to anybody else? I'm seeing blank expressions, which makes me think that maybe it's just me that would find this helpful.
I think we're happy to bring in independent repairs. But this is an issue that's far ranging, right? There's so many scan tools, there's so many different manufacturers,
That's
and
what I
you're going to
wanna
have
hear
a
about.
wide ranging kind of that's the issue at hand, right? That's why the ballot question was written as it was, is instead of having this dealership versus independent repair, well, who's getting what information, what can you fix and what can't you? This is about car owners taking control and being the gatekeepers of their own information. So having said that, I'm happy to bring in
I mean,
independent repairs
yeah,
on it.
and-
Just
and I
don't know
think
where it
just
goes.
to put a finer point on it, I mean, it'd be helpful for me if there's someone who comes forward and says like, yes, like in theory, we have access to all this information, but like, here's all the hoops we have to go through with 8 different manufacturers to get it. Like that's what I would find helpful, because I think what I'm wondering about is whether the problem really isn't that there isn't being access given, but it's not standardized in a way that makes it possible for repair shops to get access to that information if they're working on multiple types of vehicles. And so I guess unless anyone has objections, like I would welcome you to maybe bring in, I don't think we need a whole crowd. But if there are maybe 2 or 3 operators of repair facilities that could just sort of speak to like, from a hands-on sort of practical perspective, like what they have to do to get access to the diagnostic data, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, we can do that.
Is it?
Specifically the telematics related diagnostic data.
yeah,
like,
that's what I was gonna
this legislation isn't really changing anything about repair and maintenance information available when you're physically at a car through the diagnostic port. So it doesn't seem worthwhile to talk about that portion because it doesn't actually change anything there. So the change is around the telematics portion.
Yeah, and so, I mean, but I think the law does address the sort of OBD2 access. I mean, I recognize that maybe the law isn't necessary because there is the MOU,
It's
but
saying to do what already exists,
but-
so.
but I'm not sure that that's a legal requirement that's imposed on manufacturers at this point. I mean, I think a state law provides a little bit more assurance. And I also wonder, maybe if despite, and maybe this goes to what I was saying about like the burdens, like it might be, and I don't know, I don't want anyone to take my comments as me having made any determinations about what I think is going on in the world, but it might be that even though access is being provided, it's being provided in a way that's just challenging for repair facilities, if that makes sense. I mean, if you have to go buy, $10,000 software packages or, $8,000 scanners from 6 different companies, yes, in theory, the information is being made available, but it might not be being made available that makes it workable.
That MOU had provisions for the information had to be available at a reasonable cost. That's equivalent cost for the dealership and independent. repair.
So
It
maybe
just
we'll,
seems like we spent
Yeah.
2 hours or something and all the prior working groups talking about telematics data to now go start talking about a different topic. Seems like we're diverting from the core heart of this legislation has to do with telematics.
well, and so maybe we'll hear at the next meeting that there is no problem when it comes to access to the data, the non-telematic access. And if that's the case, then I think that's great. Yeah.
So would it be helpful or not helpful for those people to be prepared to speak to the historic barriers, if any, that they've had with respect to working with manufacturers on diagnostic and repair data, whether or not it's telematic data or
Yes,
not?
yes.
Okay.
And then the thing I was going to say, and I think this goes to what you were just talking about, Brian, is that I don't know if there's a way to do this. I mean, I think Tesla, is maybe in a slightly different position or different, or sort of is using, I can't think of the right word, but maybe it just isn't similarly situated to a lot of other automobile manufacturers when it comes to telematics and technology. And so what I'm wondering is if there's any way to get a sense about the extent to which telematics is being used to diagnose vehicles remotely. Like, it sounds like BMW was sort of like moving that way, but maybe they haven't gotten all the way. Jack, I recognize that you said that your dealerships really don't use telematics for remote diagnostics.
Well, it's not available yet, but a dealership is somewhat of an independent.
Can you do
repair
your microphone?
facility.
Can you do your microphone?
Dealerships are somewhat independent repair facilities too, because if you have a Chevrolet store that sells Chevrolets and someone trades in a Toyota,
Yeah.
and we're gonna put that Toyota out for sale. For us to be able to work on it, we have to have the proper equipment, which costs us money, just like an independent repair shop. The question is this remoteness, and as someone who's been in the business for 50 years selling automobiles. One of the burdens that dealerships are being forced to deal with is that when someone buys a vehicle, all of a sudden they want to pair their phone. It can be a nightmare. And they're always blaming it on the vehicle, and it's probably the cellular company they're doing business with or something like that. We had a case not too long ago where a young lady had come into us very upset, had the police with her because she had a restraining order on her boyfriend. And unfortunately, when she bought the car, she had the app with him and her on it. So he was stalking her, blaming us that we had given out information that we had no control over. My concern is I just want to make sure that when we sell a vehicle, that the customer who buys it knows right up front this information that could be out to anybody. Not my problem. I don't want to be liable for it. And a lot of customers think that the dealer is, at the root cause of where all this information is going. We have the customer sign so many privacy forms as it is. We got the FTC after us. It just goes on and on and on. I don't know where it's going to end here. But as an owner of multiple dealerships, I don't want to be responsible that someone down the road finds out that someone's stalking him because someone can be in their bedroom remotely looking in to see where the car is. That's what I'm concerned about. And hopefully you're going to be able to write a law that protects people on doing that stuff.
I guess I would echo Brian's comments. I do have some concerns with bringing in a bunch of independent repairers to sort of rehash the entire history of vehicle repair and what challenges exist, because there are elements here that are very, very disparate, right? One big challenge for independent repairers is the cost of equipment. Am I going to specialize in foreign cars? If so, I've got to buy, Volvo. I used to have to buy Saab. I'm going to buy all the foreign car parts, equipment and diagnostics, but maybe I'm just going to do Honda because I realize everyone around me sells Hondas and I can save some money that way. I mean, that's a business decision, right? Those issues are very separate from the issue of whether or not an independent entity should have some access and control over maintenance vehicle data. And I'd like to see us focus on that. And I do worry we're going to get bogged down in stories of vehicle repair, which can just really sidetrack things. We've seen it happen before. Everybody's got a story. Everybody's got a story about vehicle repair.
We can just bring in a few. We can tell them to be brief. I'm sure, like I said, there's a wide ranging different bunch of issues that go on, but if we tell them to be brief.
Yeah, what if we
Isn't there-
just, I totally hear your concerns and maybe it's just, this is just something that I really feel like I need to get a better handle on to be comfortable with it. And so what if we just set aside a half an hour for our next meeting, just to hear from maybe 1 or 2, 3 tops? And I recognize your concern, and so we won't let this get into an extended discussion and a back and forth, but I think I just need to get some basic understanding. And then I guess the other thing is that if telematics really isn't being used right now for diagnostic information, I mean, maybe Tesla's in a different position, but I'd also just be interested in hearing from repair facilities as to why it's important to them to have access to this information telematically.
Yeah, I thought there's also an organization that's out there where independent repair shops can actually log where they're having issues that gets fed back to the OEs as well. Isn't there a that could also be access that shows all these things?
Are you talking about NASTF?
Yeah,
The National Automotive
Right.
Service Task Force.
Right, so if somebody
which
can't
already
actually-
exist as like a mechanism
So-
for
but-
independent repairs to describe.
right, but that would actually show where they're having where they can't
Oh,
access
okay.
today.
I see what you mean.
Yeah, they can't access today. That's why they're doing it.
As
So-
far, as far as we're aware, and I'm happy to be corrected on this, but as far as we're aware, not one repair to date has been identified that needs telematics to be completed, ever.
So Chris, one of the things that anecdotally we might consider is not maybe to jump to the conclusions that telematics is not real, it's not happening now, it's not an issue, but the vast majority of those vehicles are under warranty and they're gonna be repaired by the dealerships or some other authorized OEM mechanic. But when those vehicles run out of warranty, and they're gonna start to run out of warranty soon, then the consumer should have a choice to take them to an independent mechanic. And I think, anecdotally, that's one of the issues that we need to consider when we think about timing and whether telematics is real.
I mean, that's actually where I was going before. I said right now, the check engine light, the most common check engine light, almost 10% across the country, is a 16-year-old vehicle. And the majority of check engine lights are all in that 2004 to 2014. It's the stuff that's coming, the stuff that's being worked on, that's under warranty, where the issues lie. A lot of the issues lie, which you might not be seeing at the independent repair shops broadly yet, but you're starting to see it now.
Although it sounds like from what Jack's saying, I mean, you operate new dealerships, and so you're seeing brand new cars that are coming in for warranty repairs, right? And it sounds like even so, you're not using telematics.
No.
Yeah. So I guess I'm just not clear on sort of the extent to which even new cars are using telematics for diagnostic information. I don't know. It'd be helpful just to get that fleshed out a little bit if we can. And then Tommy, you mentioned some technical experts, and I don't know, can you just give us maybe a quick blurb of like why you think they would be helpful to hear from?
Yeah, I mean, throughout the campaign in Massachusetts and in Maine, and for the last 10 years of trying to sit down with the manufacturers, we've put together a team of experts in the auto engineering world, and we've shown presentations to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration as of late, to Congress folks. I mean, this is obviously a big issue. It's a big part of the Biden administration, and we felt like we needed to put technical experts that could show that this could be done with existing technologies, like I said, authored by car manufacturers that exist today, that can implement this in a safe and secure way. So they put together a PowerPoint to kind of show how this could be done.
And does that get to some of the sort of the privacy concerns that have been raised?
Yeah, it gets into
Yeah.
exactly. It gets into the authentication, who can access what they can, do with that information. Again, we always go back to this, but this is about repair information. So that's what the presentation is about.
And do you have a sense of like how long the presentation is, or?
Yeah, I'd say it ranges, depending on questions. This is a very inquisitive group, so I'd say probably an hour.
All right. I mean, that seems like that'd be helpful to me. Does anyone have any objections to that? And then I don't know whether there are other things that people would find helpful for the next meeting.
Well, I guess my question is sort of, what is it that the technical experts are going to show us? We haven't defined the scope of what the platform is, if it's standardized, not standardized, who holds it, is it software, are we talking about Bluetooth? I mean, these are really fundamental questions that would be helpful to have some scope of before we get into, here's how you back end code data privacy to ensure it's de-anonymized before it goes to the independent entity. That's not going to help us at this juncture. So I'm just a little, I don't know how we can have experts come tell us how it's done when we don't know what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my thought is that it might be easier to figure out how we should do it once we hear a little bit about like how it can be done. I mean, like on the Bluetooth issue, I think that the Bluetooth, was sort of something that Massachusetts adopted because they felt that or maybe because the National Safety Administration felt that remote access was too risky. So I think it'd be helpful to maybe hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and to that end, after the Bluetooth, which is why we got our experts to go down to see the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. So that presentation is for exactly what's happening with how manufacturers are collecting information. This is a presentation to show how this could work for car owners and then to independent repairs. So we think it shows ways that this can be implemented, and I think it might even take some questions off the table that a lot of folks have, and honestly, a lot of concerns too.
Can I just ask, question I have is a whole idea of commonality that you want the Mercedes company to have the same commonality as the Kia company, so that we just have one plugin or one telematics, so you can. I don't know how that could all work. I can't imagine Mercedes want to hook up with Kia or vice versa. It just doesn't make sense to me. Their company. I don't think the Koreans want to talk to the Germans, and the Germans don't want to talk to the.
That's right.
I listen, I deal with all of them. Okay, they don't get along.
Very true.
The Japanese, the Koreans, it's amazing how they look
It's
at
just
each
like
other.
dealerships and independent repair shops
Yeah.
and car
Yeah,
manufacturers.
and
Yeah.
I just, how are you gonna do that? I would like to have someone tell me how you're gonna get that done.
Yeah, that's what we'd like to come in and show, which is,
I-
that's the group, because
But
this,
you're gonna make Mercedes have the same technical
going-
technology information as a Kia?
I'm going to make Joe's repair shop be able to fix a Mercedes and a Kia, because that is what a level
Well, they
playing
can
field is
now.
about. They can.
Yeah,
Well, some independent repairers don't fix Kias because they don't want to buy the proprietary tool in order to do so.
well,
They can't fix Kia and Mercedes because they can't afford to.
I
They're
don't fix,
specialized.
I don't fix BMWs because I don't want to buy the equipment.
Right. So you're the
It's a
dealership.
business
that's-
decision, that's all.
And but it should be, you should have the ability to do so in a standardized
Well,
way.
I can if I pay for it, but I guess I
Right.
don't follow your, I have to pay thousands of dollars just to work on my Chevrolets that I sell. The equipment, I'd love to have you find a way to get it free to me.
Right. And while I
You know,
appreciate
I'm all
that,
for that.
this is about the telematic information and
Same.
making sure that that's readily available to car owners and
Well.
independent repair shops, which no one has said that that's been made available. We don't have one piece of evidence. I keep hearing, you don't need telematics. Well, you don't need your cell phone, right? You could use a landline. You could walk here from, Connecticut, but at the end of the day, in order to have a competitive market, need to have folks have the same technology, the same standards of doing business so that people can compete for business. If you have Mercedes using proprietary information and Kia using proprietary information, that only hurts the consumer and small businesses.
We're going through the EV transition and the amount of money that dealerships and whoever else is paying just to be able to work on these things is astronomical. I mean, you got to buy a $70,000 forklift just to take the damn battery out. Are you going to make all independents have to have that equipment to get the battery out safely? OSHA's requirements to work on a vehicle? Is that what we're all coming to?
I think that's some of the issues that what you're talking about isn't right, to have a $70,000 tool to fix an electric vehicle. But like I said, I think the
No,
technical folks
it's a
will be able to.
forklift. That you have to have so much weight on it to take the battery out of that vehicle. And then you have to have a square footage around the lift so no one gets electrocuted. It's OSHA stuff. This is not this is OSHA. And I'm just kind of wondering, as we go forward here, how you're gonna handle all that.
Well, it sounds like from what I'm hearing that maybe we'll hear some thoughts from these experts that are going to come to the next meeting. Is that right, Tom?
Yeah.
That they have some thoughts about that, maybe there is a way to standardize across all different
Yeah,
manufacturers.
absolutely.
And we may or may not find it convincing, but it seems like we should hear from them and. see
It
what
would
they have to
save us
say.
a lot of money if you made it standardized. I'm really not against it. I just can't believe you're gonna make
Well,
the Mercedes company do this.
Back to the earlier discussion, the ODB2, there's probably,
Microphone on?
There were probably people before that became standard saying the same thing. How are you gonna get them all to put the same damn port on? Well, guess what? They did. So I think it's the same thing. It's just the next evolution.
So at least those are two things that I think we should do in the next meeting. It sounds like that might be an hour and a half to 2 hours worth of material. Is there anything else that people want to do? Before I throw it open, I do want to say that I really think at some point it's important for us to hear from the public. I'm not sure that we're at that point yet for the next meeting, but maybe, just I want to put it on people's radar that I think we should have a meeting in the near future where we hear from the public. Yeah, Elizabeth, did you have something? No. Okay. Anybody? Yep.
Elizabeth did mention the risk that we'll hear about these standards, but not necessarily know how they apply or don't apply to this legislation because we're still struggling with the fundamental concepts about the independent entity. So I think we need to find some way to start constraining the problem where we start to list our open questions about what is the role of the independent entity for this thing, or this thing, or this thing. And then as we listen to the experts, we'll start filling in the blanks. But if we have nothing penciled in, then we're just listening to information in a vacuum.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from my perspective, I'm looking at it a different way, which is like I feel that these first couple meetings are sort of information gathering meetings where we're just trying to get as much information as we can before we start. Because I agree with you, Brian, that at some point soon we have to start like getting down to the nitty gritty and figuring out how we're actually going to structure this independent entity and, you know, what it's going to be doing and how it's going to be doing it. I just don't feel like we're quite there yet. I just think we need to get a little bit more information. I'm thinking, you know, at least just one more meeting of sort of information gathering. And then maybe after that, we start turning to like really putting pen to paper and trying to figure out like how we actually can structure this. I just don't feel like I'm ready yet to start talking about putting together this entity before I've learned a little bit more from some folks. Okay, so we already have our next meeting on the schedule. I don't know the date offhand. It's
26.
26, okay. And so I think we have the same room, right? It'll be the same room. We'll have a Zoom link for the public and for any members who find it impracticable to come here in person. And then also my thought is we set up another meeting for 2 weeks after our next meeting. So that'll probably be like early to mid-October. And if folks are okay with just with the concept of a 2 weeks out, I think we'll do what we did before, which is I'll send around an email and ask people just to identify conflicts. And then, you know, it's challenging because everyone's super busy and has a lot of stuff on their plate and people are traveling and everything else. So we do our best to try to schedule a day when everyone is available, but it just doesn't always work out. And so I apologize for that, but we really are doing our best to try to accommodate everybody's schedule. Is that okay with everyone? All right.
What was the time for the meeting?
2 o'clock on the 26th. Yeah. All right. Any other business for today?
What's for dinner?
Anything you want. All right, we're adjourned. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.